There was no time for him to collect his thoughts. He was ushered straight to the morgue to formally identify the body. Accompanied by Caroline, a police officer, and the mortician, Mark was led to a window looking into the next room. With a flick of a switch, the mortician illuminated the space and instructed them to enter when they felt ready. At last, they stepped inside. The body lay on a gurney, covered by a deep purple sheet. A fleeting thought flitted through their minds to deny the truth, to insist it wasn't her, that some tragic mistake had been made. But there was no refuting Emily Longlay's unmistakable features. She was their beloved daughter, now motionless and cold. In moments of such profound horror, one's sense of time twists and collapses. All the tomorrows become reflections of the past. As grief thundered down on him, Mark felt its crushing force, a reminder of utter helplessness. This final identification in the morgue would be his last glimpse of Emily Longley in the flesh, a terrible punctuation mark on a tragedy that left an unfillable void in their family. This true story took place in England. Emily Longley, whose life and promising future would become a focal point of both inspiration and tragedy, was born on February 22, 1994, in a London hospital that was renowned for its dedicated staff. She arrived as the first child of Mark and Caroline Longley, a young couple grappling with the transition into parenthood. Mark, then 26 years old, faced good-natured teasing from his circle of friends, who would jokingly remind him that life was about to change forever. Despite these playful jests, Mark felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Nothing in his life had fully prepared him for the responsibility of caring for another human being, yet he was committed to embracing every challenge that parenthood would bring. At the moment of Emily's birth, Mark found himself captivated by the fragility and innocence of his daughter. When the nurse gently cleaned the newborn and placed Emily in Mark's arms, he looked down at his tiny baby girl. Her little head safely cradled in his palms, her legs scarcely reaching his elbow. It was in that split second, as Emily blinked open her eyes and seemed to study her father's face, that Mark experienced a profound realization. Any doubts about his ability to be a good father melted away. Several years later, the Longley household celebrated another joyous milestone with the birth of their second daughter, Hannah. With two blonde-haired sisters under one roof, the family dynamic became livelier and more vibrant. Emily and Hannah developed a close bond, often giggling over secret jokes and sharing favorite toys. For Mark, witnessing the camaraderie between his daughters was a source of pride and delight. He believed that as long as his children felt warmth and protection, they would always know how deeply they were loved. While Mark worked diligently as a journalist for a local newspaper, Caroline dedicated her days to teaching, striving to inspire children from various backgrounds and instill in them the values of knowledge and empathy. Their home, though sometimes bustling with noise and activity, resonated with stability and promise. It was the kind of nurturing environment that many parents aspire to create, one where small moments of happiness become precious memories. Yet change, even when motivated by necessity, can dramatically alter the course of a family's journey. 10 years after Emily's birth, the Longleys made the life-altering decision to leave their hometown of Bournemouth and start anew in the scenic realms of New Zealand. This move was spurred by a critical recommendation from Emily's doctor, who believed that relocating to a different climate might significantly benefit her health. Despite the daunting prospect of uprooting everything familiar, friends, extended family, and a settled routine, Mark and Caroline resolved that their daughter's well-being took precedence. They hoped that the fresh air and varied landscapes of New Zealand would breathe renewed vitality into Emily's life, while also offering new experiences for Hannah. Traveling halfway across the globe meant the family had to adapt to fresh customs, different accents, and local traditions they had never encountered. Though excited, they couldn't help feeling apprehensive about whether they were making the right call. New Zealand, with its temperate maritime climate, presented 4 distinct seasons, each shaped by the influence of the Pacific Ocean and the country's diverse mountain ranges. Winters were milder, and summers were cooler compared to what the Longleys were accustomed to in England. Nevertheless, the soothing nature of the environment proved to be a welcoming force. Lush greenery, crisp mountain air, and serene ocean views helped the family find solace in their new surroundings. In this peaceful setting, the next chapter of the Longley family's life began. Emily, ever the curious and spirited teenager, enrolled in a prestigious private school. She initially took to her studies with the same enthusiasm she had once shown back home. For a fleeting time, it seemed as if she had found her footing, but social intricacies would soon disrupt her newfound stability. A close friend she trusted, Sarah Letour Blanche, suddenly turned against her. Sarah's allegations and sensational revelations about Emily's involvement with a questionable group and potentially banned substances became headlines in their school newspaper, causing a stir that threatened Emily's budding sense of belonging. This betrayal left Emily feeling alienated and wounded. Nonetheless, her resilience shone through. By the end of 2010, she decided it was time to chart a new course, one that would involve returning to England to pursue further education. It was a difficult choice, as it meant saying goodbye to her parents and sister, but Emily was determined to start fresh. She took up residence with her grandparents, Ronald and Zoe Longley, in a spacious detached cottage located near the promenade in Southbourne, not far from Bournemouth. The picturesque setting, with ocean breezes and coastal walks, seemed like the perfect backdrop for a new beginning. Enthusiastically, Emily enrolled in a British college, hopeful that this transition would help her rediscover both her academic momentum and personal harmony. To her great relief, the plan worked. Having struggled with the social upheavals in New Zealand, Emily found a more stable and comfortable environment in England. She could once again focus on her studies and gradually rebuild her social life without the constant undercurrent of rumor and ostracism. By the age of 18, Emily stood out not only for her vivacious personality, but also for her captivating blonde beauty. Her sparkling eyes and warm smile made people gravitate toward her. Modeling agencies quickly noticed her, extending opportunities that hinted at a promising career in fashion. However, it wasn't merely her looks that drew attention. It was the combination of charm, intelligence, and determination she exuded. In her community, people spoke admiringly of her strong will, sense of humor, and wholehearted commitment to any venture she took on. In December 2010, at a casual yet lively party, Emily crossed paths with 19-year-old Elliot Vince Turner. Elliot was the only son of Lee Turner, a prosperous jeweler whose business was reputed for its exquisite designs and thriving clientele. Elliot himself was involved in the family enterprise, helping his father manage their jewelry store in Bournemouth. Despite his youth, he relished the privileges that came with being part of a well-off family and lived in Queen's Park, one of Bournemouth's most affluent neighborhoods. Socially, Elliot was associated with a group known as The Firm, an assembly of privileged young men who frequented the region's hottest bars and clubs. Their lifestyle was marked by extravagance, nightly outings, lavish spending, and an unwavering sense of confidence. Some observers, including those who had known Elliot casually, questioned the group's priorities, suspecting that their indulgences might eventually lead to trouble. Nevertheless, for many of these young individuals, their social circle presented an endless series of parties, connections, and opportunities to display their status. Emily, stepping into Elliot's world of conspicuous wealth, was dazzled yet also curious. She had tasted a modestly comfortable life, but Elliot's privileged background offered a window into a glamorous social scene she'd rarely encountered before. While she retained her down-to-earth sensibilities, Emily found herself drawn to the glitz and excitement, unsure whether this connection was part of her personal growth or a detour fraught with hidden perils. In these moments of possibility and uncertainty, Emily continued to balance her college commitments and her part-time job, trying to remain true to the optimism and independence that had defined her. She held on to the lessons learned in New Zealand about resilience and self-discovery. Little did she know that her association with Elliot Vince Turner and the broader circle he introduced her to would usher in a new phase of her life, one marked by an undercurrent of risk. Elliot Turner presented himself as a charismatic young man, someone who constantly drew the attention of women thanks to his confident demeanor and lavish lifestyle. Yet beneath that polished exterior, He was nearly consumed by an obsession, one that manifested in jealousy and possessiveness. Though many were mesmerized by his good looks, financial status, and charming compliments, those who took a closer look often sensed a darker side lurking beneath his smooth talk. Despite warning signs that friends occasionally picked up on, Emily Longley, with her radiant personality and emerging modeling career, found herself growing closer to Elliot at lightning speed. The two quickly formed an official relationship, and for a brief period, everything appeared blissful. Elliot showered her with attention, constantly praising her blossoming modeling jobs. She had started earning her own income, boosting her confidence and increasing her visibility. The modeling world seemed drawn to Emily's enthusiasm and natural talent, and she, in turn, found satisfaction in her professional progress. However, Elliot's admiration of Emily soon took a disturbing turn. The same qualities that initially attracted him, her vivacity, good looks, and ambition, became sources of unbearable jealousy. Within a mere 4 months, what had begun as a whirlwind romance deteriorated into a contentious battlefield punctuated by near-daily shouting matches and unresolved grievances. Publicly, they still tried to maintain an air of normalcy, but those closest to the couple noticed the frequent tension and arguments that overshadowed any fleeting moments of peace. Even a minor misunderstanding could escalate into a dramatic scene. Elliot's intense jealousy and distrust fueled a pattern of emotional abuse that gradually became an unfortunate norm. If he disapproved of Emily's choice of clothing, perhaps a top that accentuated her figure or a skirt he deemed too short, he would denounce her attire with shocking insults, going so far as to accuse her of dressing like a call girl. As her modeling career picked up, he began suspecting that each photo shoot or meeting was an excuse to flirt. Elliot's obsession led him to hack into her Facebook profile, sifting through her messages and friend requests to confirm whether she had been speaking to other men. He would sometimes even appear unannounced at places he believed she might be, friends' gatherings, coffee shops, or the edge of a photo set, just to keep her under his watchful gaze. Unsurprisingly, these invasions of privacy and accusations stripped Emily of any sense of freedom or security. She felt as if she were living in a constant state of watchfulness and worry. She hoped each outburst was the last, but each time he erupted in rage, he used both his physical presence and seething anger to intimidate her. More than once, she wrote him short notes begging him to calm down, including one simple but telling line: "Stop being so aggressive." Sometimes Elliot would appear remorseful, apologizing profusely and promising never to lose his temper again. For a brief moment, Emily would allow herself to believe these promises, only to have them shattered when the next wave of jealousy inevitably arose. Before long, Elliot escalated from screaming insults to physical violence. On multiple occasions, he not only grabbed Emily by the throat, but also struck her publicly, leaving witnesses shocked and fearful of intervening. In an alarming twist of self-justification, he insisted that her supposed flirtations provoked him into these uncontrollable emotional outbursts. Each instance of violence brought Emily to the brink of ending the relationship, yet she felt trapped in a tangle of fear, guilt, and diminishing self-confidence. Ultimately, Emily decided she needed a break from the toxic environment. She traveled to New Zealand to visit her parents and sister Hannah, seeking solace in the comforting familiarity of her childhood home. The Easter holidays provided a much-needed respite from the chaos Elliot introduced into her life. During this visit, the Longley family engaged in bonding activities they used to enjoy in her younger years. Going on long walks, chatting over home-cooked meals, laughing together at silly memories. There was an unspoken awareness that this time together felt unusually precious, as if a countdown timer were ticking in the background. When Emily prepared to leave, her father wrapped her in a heartfelt embrace, a gesture loaded with love and a hint of apprehension. She promised him she would return in September for the Rugby World Cup. Even after boarding her flight, Emily's devotion to her family shone through. She sent a text message to her father that read, "It was so good to see you. I love you." Ever since her earliest days, she and her father had nurtured a strong, loving bond. Unknown to both of them, that Easter holiday in New Zealand would mark the final time they would see each other. In her mind, Emily believed she would soon end her toxic relationship with Elliot once and for all. Tragically, that decision would coincide with the violent unraveling of her final days. The moment Emily set foot back in the UK, Elliot didn't greet her with relief or joy. Rather, he had new accusations waiting for her. Shortly before her return, he had stumbled upon photographs on social media showing Emily alongside two shirtless young men, which ignited his already raging jealousy. In a fit of anger, he demanded she come over to his parents' home for the night, urging her to discuss their problems face to face. Emily was initially hesitant, but she believed that Lee and Anita Turner, Elliot's parents, being present in the same household might offer her some measure of safety. She agreed, hoping she could reason with Elliot and fully articulate her decision to end the relationship. However, the moment she arrived at the Turner residence, Elliot unleashed a barrage of hurtful comments, accusations, and fierce resentment. The argument escalated to deafening levels, with both of them shouting back and forth in bitter frustration. According to neighbors and witness accounts, the yelling lasted for close to half an hour. Then came an abrupt, unsettling silence. By the morning of May 7, 2011, frantic calls to emergency services reported an 18-year-old girl found unresponsive in Elliot Turner's bedroom. Anita Turner, who allegedly made the discovery, placed the phone call. EMT rushed to the scene only to confirm the worst. Emily had died sometime during the night. On May 6, 2011, Emily Longley exchanged casual, lighthearted messages with her father via Facebook just hours before her death. Her words carried no hint of dread. She sounded like her usual cheerful self. Then, on May 7th, everything shifted in a way Mark Longley could never have predicted. He was roused from sleep by his phone vibrating. Initially groggy, he let the calls go to voicemail. When he finally checked, he noticed numerous missed calls from his ex-wife, Caroline, and multiple unread messages. While it wasn't unusual for Caroline to send texts or try to reach him, the sheer number of attempts was alarming. Realizing something was very wrong, he picked up a subsequent call, only to hear their younger daughter, Hannah, sobbing uncontrollably. Through the phone, he heard Caroline screaming in the background, "Emily is gone! Emily is gone!" In an instant, the foundation of his world cracked. He collapsed onto the very couch where Emily herself had been sitting just a week earlier. Disbelief engulfed him. He struggled to fathom that the bright, lively young woman with a future full of promise was suddenly gone. The weight of this realization was so overwhelming that he recalled nothing else about that night except the pervasive, suffocating sense of loss and shock that consumed him. Unable to rest, he booked a flight to England and stayed awake until finally boarding the plane. Even that long journey felt dreamlike and unreal. Mark remembered stopping in a small town while traveling to Auckland and seeing Emily's face on the front page of the New Zealand Herald. The headline made his stomach churn with dread. At the airport, he watched as travelers tossed their newspapers into trash bins. Overcome with grief, he felt an urge to tell them who Emily was, to implore them to keep those papers because she wasn't just another face in the news. She was his daughter, and she had once been so full of life and joy. The flight to England felt unending as he replayed memories in his mind and clung to the glimmering hope that everything was just an unthinkable mistake. But once he arrived, the grim reality hit home. There was no time for him to gather his thoughts. He was taken directly to the morgue to formally identify Emily's body. Surrounded by Caroline, a police officer, and the mortician, Mark was shown a window looking into the next room. The mortician flipped a switch to illuminate the space, instructing them to go in when ready. Yet, for several agonizing moments, both Mark and Caroline stood frozen, hands trembling with the sickening dread of seeing their child in such a setting. Finally, they stepped in. Emily lay upon a gurney, covered by a deep purple sheet. A fleeting thought surged in their minds to deny the obvious, to claim it was not her, that a tragic mistake had been made. But there was no denying Emily's unmistakable features. It was their beloved daughter, motionless and cold. Mark reached out, gently placing a hand on her face. The skin, once radiant with youth, had the pallor of alabaster and was chilled by death. In that single moment, a stark contrast to the day she was born, he realized there would be no coming back. She wasn't going to open her eyes, laugh, or exclaim she had been pulling an elaborate prank. She was gone. In moments of such profound horror, one's sense of time distorts and collapses. All the tomorrows become reflections of the past. As the wave of grief came crashing down, Mark felt its crushing force, a realization of total helplessness. This identification in the morgue would be his final time seeing Emily in the flesh, a terrible punctuation mark on a tragedy that left an unfillable void in their family. The authorities took swift action. Elliot Turner was arrested immediately under suspicion of involvement in Emily's death. However, he was soon released on bail while detectives gathered more information for what was shaping up to be a highly complex investigation. During this process, a guilty conscience seemed to weigh heavily on Elliot, prompting him to write a confession detailing the events of that evening and his role in Emily's tragic end. Yet, out of desperation to protect their only son, his parents, 51-year-old Anita Turner and 53-year-old Lee Turner, allegedly orchestrated a cover-up to buy him time and possibly mitigate the consequences he faced. In a calculated move, they removed Elliot's coat from their home, the same one he had worn on the night Emily died. In the pocket of that coat, they found his written confession, a piece of evidence that could decisively shape the outcome of the investigation. Realizing its damaging potential, Anita and Lee allegedly doused the letter with bleach before discarding any other items they believed might implicate their son. This attempt to conceal or destroy critical evidence became a focal point of the ongoing inquiry, leading investigators to suspect that more information was being kept secret. Determined to uncover the truth, law enforcement took a bold step. They installed covert listening devices inside the large Turner family home. From May 18 to June 14, these hidden microphones captured conversations among Elliot and his parents. The authorities scrutinized hours of recorded dialogue, eventually hearing discussions that seemed to reference fabricating an alibi, worrying about how to maintain consistency in their statements, and grappling with whether they had told the police too many or too few details. Such revelations raised immediate red flags, intensifying the determination of investigators to pursue every available lead. In tandem with the audio evidence, the police executed a seizure of the Turner family's computers, eager to discover any digital footprints, emails, online searches, or social media communications that might confirm suspicions of a cover-up. Collectively, these investigative measures painted an increasingly damning picture. A possessive, violent individual who had allegedly committed a heinous crime, and parents who sought to protect him by obstructing the course of justice. Investigators searching the Turner household soon uncovered a revealing piece of digital evidence. A thorough examination of the browser's search history exposed several grim queries, including death by strangulation and how to avoid a murder charge. These alarming discoveries shed a stark light on the events that followed and strongly suggested a premeditated element to the tragedy. Acting on this evidence and additional findings, law enforcement officials took decisive action in July, arresting all three members of the Turner family, Elliot, along with his parents, Lee and Anita, on charges of involvement in the incident and the deliberate concealment of vital evidence. From the moment of his arrest, Elliot Turner refused to accept any responsibility for Emily Longley's death. He maintained his innocence, insisting that her own actions and supposed behavioral issues brought on every difficulty in his life. His claims, however, stood in direct contradiction to the meticulously gathered forensic evidence. A reconstruction of the incident revealed that on the day Emily died, Elliot forcibly pinned her down and pressed her face into the bed with a pillow, aiming to subdue her. After discarding the pillow, he continued to apply deadly force by strangling her with his bare hands. Once he realized she was no longer resisting, he coldly stepped away and left the room, making no effort to call for help. The results of the pathological examination only reinforced the suspicion that Emily died from intentional violence. Injuries around her neck clearly indicated strangulation, and subtle bruising was found consistent with extreme pressure. Further corroboration emerged from the scratches on Elliot's arm, which matched the marks Emily made in her desperate attempt to defend herself. Clinging to the hope of escape, she had fought back, leaving her DNA under her fingernails and on Elliott's skin. During the subsequent trial, the prosecution painted a detailed picture of Elliott Turner's escalating possessiveness and volatility. They laid out example after example of his disturbing threats, aggression, and attempts to control Emily's every move. Over time, his jealousy had worsened, culminating in an explosive argument on a night in May 2011. The catalyst for this particular confrontation was Emily's outfit choice and photographs she had taken with men Elliott did not know. Fueled by bitterness and pride, he lashed out with verbal abuse and, ultimately, physical violence. At the heart of the legal battle was the Turner family's desperation to preserve their privileged status and protect their only son. Elliott was from a wealthy background. His father, Lee Turner, was a successful jeweler, and the family's affluence was no secret around Bournemouth. Fearing the loss of their son and the shame that would accompany a murder conviction, they hired a formidable legal team. Defense attorneys, for their part, tried to deflect blame away from Elliott by hypothesizing, without any real evidence, that Emily may have been under the influence of illegal substances. However, Dorset police responded by ordering an independent toxicology test, which found no evidence of banned substances in Emily's system. The defense's insinuations quickly unraveled under the weight of scientific fact. As the case progressed, the full extent of the Turner parents' actions came to light. Both Lee and Anita Turner played a direct role in disposing of incriminating items and destroying written confessions that would have bolstered the case against Elliott. This systematic cover-up underscored just how far they were willing to go to shield their son, even if it meant obstructing the course of justice. It was revealed during court proceedings that, by erasing physical clues and tampering with critical documents, they effectively delayed the official investigation. Regardless of their intentions, their interference significantly complicated the process of establishing precisely what happened during Emily's final moments. From the recollections of those closest to Emily, it's clear that Elliott Turner's treatment of her went well beyond simple jealousy. He wielded power over Emily, a kind of cruelty that Emily's father suspects began long before she returned to New Zealand. Tragically, she kept these experiences to herself, possibly out of fear or uncertainty. Those closest to the Longley family wonder how events might have turned out differently if only she had told them what was happening. Eventually, the jury at Winchester Crown Court reached a resounding verdict in May of the following year. Elliott Turner, who was just 20 years old at the time, was found guilty of ending the life of 18-year-old Emily Longley in a fit of jealous rage. The court determined that Emily's death occurred in Elliott's own bed, after a fierce confrontation sparked by his suspicions and an unrelenting need to dominate her. During the sentencing phase, Judge Dobbs delivered a powerful admonishment. He declared that Elliott had relentlessly intimidated, stalked, threatened, and assaulted Emily, all part of a twisted campaign to keep her under his control as a trophy girlfriend. The judge also addressed Elliott's extravagant ambitions head-on, telling him to forget any fantasies involving champagne, Bentleys, and parties, as he would be headed to prison for life, with a requirement that he serve at least 16 years before the possibility of parole. Lee Turner, then 54, and Anita Turner, 51, were also sentenced in the same court session. Both had been found guilty of obstructing justice by destroying and concealing evidence following Emily's death in their Bournemouth home. Their efforts to protect Elliott from the legal consequences of his actions came at a personal cost. They, too, would serve time behind bars. Elliott, in addition to his conviction for taking Emily's life, received an additional 9-month sentence for his role in hiding evidence. Prosecutors argued convincingly that Elliott had initially covered Emily's face with a pillow, effectively suffocating her, before deciding to employ direct strangulation. This double act of violence confirmed the malicious intent at the heart of the crime. Additional court rulings revealed a consistent timeline for Elliott's convictions. In May 2012, he was formally sentenced to life imprisonment. His parents also faced further legal repercussions for their role in destroying evidence, receiving 27-month sentences for misleading the police and destroying Elliott's confession note. Because Emily's death was initially treated as a homicide case, law enforcement retained her body as they carried out extensive forensic examinations. Heartbreakingly, it was not until September that her remains could be released for a proper funeral service in her hometown, and even then, it was a closed casket ceremony. A somber conclusion that denied Emily's loved ones the chance to see her at peace one last time. Disturbingly, the Daily Star reported that Elliot continues to adorn his prison cell walls with pictures of Emily, suggesting that even behind bars, his obsessive fixation persists. In conversations with fellow inmates and prison staff, he has allegedly expressed eagerness for the day he might walk free, boasting about returning to a life of luxury cars, opulent parties, and glamorous women. This unrepentant attitude has only heightened fears that he has neither come to grips with nor shown any remorse for the irreversible damage he inflicted. With the passage of years, Emily's father has managed to find some measure of peace in his own life. He has remarried, finding comfort and companionship in his new wife, Hillary. Together, they have a beautiful son named Hunter, who brings joy to the household. Meanwhile, Emily's younger sister, Hannah, has graduated from university and established a life firmly grounded in the knowledge that abuse, control, and violence have no place in a healthy relationship. For Mark Longley, time has underscored the vital lesson he hopes others will learn. Love means uplifting someone's dreams and supporting their independence. Love does not belittle or command. It does not raise a hand in anger, nor does it destroy trust through manipulation. He is convinced that if more people understood these truths, and if more victims felt safe to speak out, fewer families would be torn apart by violence. Yet Emily's fate compels him to keep her memory alive so that others can recognize and avoid the red flags she faced in silence. This is the story of a mysterious and deeply tragic crime against a young woman that will undoubtedly shock you, just as it shocked the peaceful community of Orange Beach, Alabama, USA. People there had rarely experienced anything so unsettling in their close-knit beach town, and the events that unfolded drew national attention and left many with unanswered questions. The story centers around a missing person case that took a devastating turn, culminating in a heartbreaking discovery on a quiet ranch in North Texas. On May 19, 2016, the police chief finally brought the long-awaited but dreadful news to the family of 27-year-old Jesse Bardwell, who had disappeared under worrying circumstances. The call came through to her father, Gary Bardwell, who had already spent countless nights awake, dreading he might never see his daughter alive again. The chief spoke carefully, breaking the news with profound regret in his voice. "I'm sorry, sir. Today will be a difficult day for your family. Unfortunately, we do not expect to find your daughter alive, but we do have information on where she might be." But before the police reached out to Jesse's father, Gary, an anonymous tipster called them the day before and provided critical information about the possible location of Jesse's body. Upon receiving this distressing update, a team comprising seasoned detectives, along with FBI agents and local law enforcement officers, set out for a remote ranch in Farmersville, North Texas. As the day turned to evening, the group arrived on the ranch grounds and immediately plunged into a search of the surrounding wooded area. Darkness was falling, and the mosquitoes and thick underbrush made the search grueling. Yet, the officers pushed onward, guided by flashlights and a sense of grim determination. They soon stumbled upon a small, rusted piece of metal, partially concealed by leaves and debris. This makeshift covering was hiding something. The odor of decomposition filled the humid air, making it clear that this was no ordinary discovery. On the other side of the metal covering lay a woman's lifeless body, wrapped in a tattered blue sheet. The remains were partially hidden beneath a faded blanket and two red gold towels stained with what appeared to be dried blood. To make matters worse, a heap of trash, mixed with dirt, food scraps, and other household waste, had been piled on top as a crude attempt at burial. Anyone with a more sophisticated understanding of forensic evidence would have realized that this rudimentary concealment would draw attention rather than disguise the scene. When the officers saw the condition of the body, they paused with solemn respect. The remains had suffered a full week of exposure under the relentless, scorching Texas sun, leading to advanced decomposition. The once vibrant young woman was now unrecognizable. The forensic experts who arrived at the scene immediately began a painstaking investigation. Due to the body's deteriorated state, They estimated they would need at least 7 full days to make a positive identification. To aid them, they requested dental records of the presumed victim, as the initial evidence pointed strongly to the unfortunate remains belonging to the missing Jessie Bardwell. The results of the preliminary forensic examination confirmed that the woman's death was, in fact, the result of a crime. Yet, determining the exact cause of death was extremely difficult because of the decomposition. Nevertheless, investigators noted that an anonymous informant had provided crucial information regarding the potential location of Jessie's body. Curiously, this informant's identity remained undisclosed, and their motive for coming forward was never fully explained to the public. What mattered at that moment was that Jessie had been found, albeit too late. But to fully understand the depth of this tragedy, we should start from the beginning. Gary Bardwell recounted many stories of his young daughter's playful spirit. But his most vivid memory was the moment he first laid eyes on her in the hospital, right after she was born. He remembered being overwhelmed with a protective, powerful love. Jessie, so tiny and delicate, captured his heart immediately. And from that day forward, Gary felt his life's purpose was to protect and support his little girl. Born on September 10, 1988, in Pascagoula, Mississippi, Jessie's early childhood was filled with warmth, laughter, and unity. Her parents, Gary and Carla Bardwell, showered her with love and care, and they brought up Jessie alongside her older brother, Brandon. Family gatherings were lively and joyous occasions. Grandma Kitty, in particular, adored her grandchildren and frequently visited. She would spend hours reading them storybooks, sharing her own tales of growing up, and inventing countless creative games that fueled their imagination. The Bardwells seemed the picture of a typical, happy American family, living modestly but joyfully. As Jessie grew older, her personality shone through in everything she did. From a young age, she exhibited a kindness that made her stand out. She would often share her lunch with classmates who forgot theirs, or comfort a friend who felt lonely. She also had a distinctive, evolving sense of style, sporting bright accessories and unique outfits, demonstrating the confident individuality that made people gravitate toward her. Among her earliest ambitions was to work in the beauty industry. Jessie dreamed of opening her own salon and transforming her creative ideas into a successful career. However, when Jessie turned 14, life in the Bardwell household changed dramatically. Gary and Carla decided to divorce, and this inevitably changed the family dynamic. The once unified home split into 2 separate households, forcing Jessie to decide with whom she would live. Without hesitation, she chose to stay with her father, reflecting the profound closeness they had shared ever since her birth. Despite the emotional turbulence, Gary remained a stabilizing force in Jessie's life, and he juggled his duties as a firefighter with raising a teenage daughter. Around this time, Gary remarried, introducing Jessie to a new maternal figure, Gina. Fortunately, the transition was smoother than many might expect. Jessie got along well with her stepmother, who was a caring and proactive presence in the household. Gina took pride in keeping a warm, welcoming home, often cooking meals that brought everyone around the table. Jessie appreciated the effort and recognized that Gina made her father genuinely happy. It gave her peace of mind to know her father was not alone when she would inevitably leave home to pursue her own ambitions. After finishing high school, Jessie decided it was time to become independent and explore life outside the nest. She moved from Mississippi to Orange Beach, Alabama, where she sought out both new experiences and better job prospects. To support herself financially, she found a position at Cobalt, a popular beachfront restaurant, well known among locals and visitors. According to Gary, his daughter absolutely loved the soothing presence of the ocean. The rolling waves and gentle salt air helped her find calm and relaxation after busy shifts waiting tables. Father and daughter spoke frequently, sometimes exchanging text messages every day. Jessie would update Gary on her life, sharing funny anecdotes about her regular customers and describing her favorite menu items at Cobalt. She often mentioned how she delighted in seeing tourists enjoy the stunning beachfront sunsets, reminding her how wonderful life could be. When he came to visit Jessie in Orange Beach, they would often go boating on the warm Gulf waters and spend peaceful hours fishing together. This was a cherished tradition for both father and daughter, reminding them of the deep bond they shared. During these visits, Jesse would show him around the bustling beachfront scene, and in return, he would play his guitar whenever there was an opportunity. Kimberly Ebery, the manager of the restaurant where Jesse worked, and one of Jesse's close friends, was especially taken by the loving, supportive dynamic between father and daughter. She learned that Jesse's father was not only a retired public servant, but also a skilled musician who found time in his later years to dedicate himself fully to his craft. Indeed, when Gary, Jesse's father, retired, he threw himself into perfecting his guitar technique and writing heartfelt songs, often inspired by family life and the people he cared about. Once his talent became more widely known, he was regularly invited to perform at Jesse's workplace, a lively, popular spot that welcomed both locals and tourists. In fact, Gary became something of a fixture there, known for his soulful performances and friendly demeanor. People soon recognized him not only as Jesse's father, but also as a musician with genuine talent, passion, and a knack for making the crowd feel at ease. Over time, the restaurant even placed a small, personalized plaque on one of the tables, unofficially reserving it for him whenever he chose to drop by. Kimberly would later confide in friends that she deeply admired the relationship between Jesse and her dad. He was not simply a father, but also a friend, someone Jesse could laugh with, confide in, and lean on for encouragement. Jesse never missed a chance to support him whenever he played his music. She would collect the tips he earned during each gig, stashing them away with the hope of using the money toward her future college tuition and to pursue her dream of opening a salon. Even though she worked hard as a waitress, Jessie always kept her eyes on the prize, building a life that would make her family proud. At work, Jessie happened to meet a kind-hearted young man named Terry Ellis, who was employed there as a waiter as well. Their shared profession gave them many opportunities to chat and bond, whether they were rushing to serve large parties of diners or wiping down tables at the end of a shift. Over a few weeks, their friendship blossomed into romance, and soon they were a steady couple. Those around them noted how comfortable and relaxed they seemed together. Terry was gentle, thoughtful, and quick to offer help whenever Jessie needed it. Observers thought they might eventually move in together or even get engaged, given how harmonious they seemed. However, fate intervened at a social gathering one evening. Jessie encountered Terry's friend, a charismatic and intriguing individual by the name of Jason Lowe, sometimes spelled Lowe. Jason was strikingly attractive, well-groomed, and exuded a confident charm that captured Jessie's attention almost immediately. Within a short span of time, Jessie was completely smitten. Everyone around her was surprised at how quickly she seemed to fall for him, as though entranced by a new, overpowering energy. After carefully weighing her feelings, Jessie decided she could no longer stay with Terry, despite the fact that their relationship had been going smoothly. She and Terry parted on relatively good terms, with no huge arguments or lingering animosity. Yet it was clear that Jessie's life was about to take a dramatic turn. The new boyfriend, Jason, undoubtedly had qualities that appealed to Jessie. He held 2 college degrees, spoke eloquently, and boasted a promising job in the technology sector. His polite manner impressed many people upon first meeting him, although some did wonder if his smooth exterior might hide a more controlling or secretive nature. For Jessie, the allure of a future with Jason felt like a ticket to a whole new existence. In an effort to be attentive and generous, he promised to help her realize her lifelong dream of opening her own salon if she followed him on his ambitious professional journey. Eventually, Jason announced that he needed to relocate from Alabama to Dallas, Texas, to accept a lucrative position in the tech industry, one that apparently offered competitive pay and ample opportunities for advancement. For Jessie, the thought of moving to a large, bustling metropolitan area sounded thrilling, more like an adventure than a life-altering risk. Nevertheless, as her friend Kimberly later recounted, Jessie felt conflicted about leaving her father behind for too long. She was worried that Gary would be disappointed or feel abandoned. Despite these hesitations, her youthful optimism and determination to start a new chapter won out. She planned her departure in secret, aware that Gary might have strong objections if he knew of her plan to move away with a man he had never even met. During their final Christmas together, Gary observed nothing amiss in Jessie's demeanor. She was as bubbly as ever, laughing easily and joining in all the family celebrations. In fact, her lighthearted mood put everyone at ease, and no one suspected that she was preparing to uproot her life entirely. Gary, who always kept a protective eye on his daughter, noted that she showed no signs of distress whatsoever. It was only afterward that the family realized she had been masking her fears about her father's potential disapproval. Within a month or two, the 24-year-old Jessie found herself in Richardson, a suburb of Dallas. Jason set up his home office to work remotely, while Jessie explored new job opportunities in the area, specifically those that might eventually lead to her running her own salon. The couple spoke excitedly about the possibility of buying a house in Texas, settling down, and starting a life that would fulfill both of their ambitions. Plans of marriage were mentioned, although no official date was set. Yet, as Jessie settled into her new environment, her relationship with her father underwent a significant shift. The once frequent calls and text messages dwindled, then practically vanished. Gary became increasingly worried when days and weeks went by without a word from her. Concerned and somewhat puzzled, he reached out to Kimberly for any news or updates. That was when he first learned the truth. Jessie had moved to another state with a new boyfriend. Stunned and hurt, Gary nonetheless resolved to maintain contact with his daughter. When he tried to get in touch, he discovered that Jason seemed to manage all communication channels. Jessie's phone often went straight to voicemail, and messages remained unanswered for long periods. On those occasions when Gary did manage to speak directly to Jason, he was told that Jessie would call back, but often she never did. This pattern struck Gary as both unsettling and manipulative. He also learned that whenever Jason allowed Jessie to talk to her father, Jason hovered in the background, making it feel as though the conversation was monitored. Months later, the couple visited Pascagoula, and Gary finally had the chance to meet Jason face to face. Although Jason behaved politely, the father sensed an undercurrent of tension. Something about Jason made him uneasy, an intangible sense that this man was not who he claimed to be. Gary tried to persuade Jessie to stay home in Mississippi and reconsider going back to Texas. He voiced his deep reservations, admitting that he didn't trust Jason's intentions. Jessie, however, insisted she was fine and seemed as confident as ever in her decisions. She hugged her father more tightly than usual before leaving, which triggered further alarms in Gary's mind. Despite her outward tranquility, the father later recounted a distinct gut feeling that something was very wrong. Shortly after that visit, Gary channeled his anxieties into his music, composing a poignant piece entitled "Taken," dedicated to Jessie. He described writing the lyrics as both cathartic and heartbreaking, a way to express the helplessness he felt watching his daughter slip further and further out of reach. About 4 months after Jessie first settled in Texas, all contact from her suddenly stopped. She did not return calls or reply to messages, leaving her father more alarmed than ever. Then, on May 8th, a critical warning sign arrived. Jessie never reached out to wish her mother and stepmother a happy Mother's Day, an absence of communication that was completely out of character for the warm, thoughtful young woman. This omission sounded immediate alarm bells for Gary, as Jessie had always been conscientious about significant family milestones. He dialed Jason's number, hoping for answers, but was given vague, dismissive explanations. Jason claimed that Jessie came and went as she pleased because they were in an open relationship. Gary instantly knew that this was not only a lie, but a deeply contradictory statement from a man who had shown signs of being highly jealous and possessive. It appeared that Jason was spinning a story to mask Jessie's disappearance and prevent her father from panicking. By this point, Gary's every instinct told him that something unimaginable had happened to his daughter. The following morning, still reeling from his daughter's unexplained disappearance and feeling an urgent need to act, Jessie's father, Gary Bardwell, packed a small bag, got into his car, and set out for Texas. He was convinced, deep in his gut, that his daughter's boyfriend, Jason Lowe, was somehow involved. While making the long drive, he sent a blunt, straightforward text message to Jason's phone. "If Jessie isn't home when I get there, you're in big trouble." This message encapsulated his escalating suspicions and his determination to protect his daughter, come what may. Upon arriving at the apartment Jesse shared with Jason, Gary found himself in a heart-wrenching situation. Jesse's personal items, her clothes, her makeup, all the small possessions that defined her, were conspicuously absent. There were no traces of her daily routines, like the special coffee she usually kept in the cupboard or her favorite books that she stacked near the couch. It was as if she had never lived there at all. Nevertheless, Jason maintained the same story he had been telling everyone else. He had no idea where Jessie was and was simply waiting for her to return of her own accord. His demeanor, oddly calm and collected, only heightened Gary's sense that something was terribly amiss. Later, as Gary continued to seek information, Kimberly, the manager of the restaurant in Orange Beach where Jessie used to work, offered more insight. During a few sparse moments of private conversation, Jessie had quietly confided in her. She had revealed that Jason's personal spending habits were completely out of control. He supposedly spent large sums of money on illicit substances and nights out, squandering funds he had previously promised to use toward helping Jessie realize her dream, the establishment of her own salon. As time wore on, it became evident that Jason was not at all who he presented himself to be in public. In fact, Jessie's attempts to keep up appearances of a loving, harmonious relationship masked her boyfriend's rude, aggressive behavior behind closed doors. Kimberly confessed that Jessie endured plenty of arguments with Jason, who often turned their private disputes nasty. Faced with Jessie's disappearance and no clear path forward, Gary headed to the Richardson Police Department to file a missing person report. He came into contact with Detective Hiram Hale, a family man and father of 3 daughters. The detective, having a personal appreciation for the protective bond between parent and child, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Determined to uncover the truth of what happened to Jessie, he launched a thorough investigation. Time was of the essence, and law enforcement wasted none of it. They questioned Jason Lowe multiple times and conducted a meticulous search of the apartment, hoping to find any trace of Jessie's whereabouts. During these interviews, Jason offered a timeline that he claimed explained Jessie's disappearance. He told detectives that the last time he saw her was on May 8th, around 10 in the morning. According to him, she had walked out of their home without saying much and possibly drove off to visit her parents. He insisted that despite the strong feelings they shared, their relationship was casual and uncommitted. He claimed he had no desire or reason to monitor her every movement. Yet this portrayal of an easygoing, hands-off boyfriend ran counter to the information the investigators were gathering from friends, family, and even from small details in the apartment itself. It soon came to light that Jessie no longer even had a car of her own. In fact, she had sold her Acura 3 weeks prior to her disappearance, a transaction that Jason himself had reportedly witnessed. This glaring contradiction raised immediate red flags for Detective Hale and his team. If Jessie had sold her car, how could she have driven away on the morning of May 8th as Jason claimed? Confronted with this discrepancy, the police decided to press him again on May 12th, determined to probe deeper and uncover the truth. A subsequent search of Jason's apartment brought new and disturbing discoveries. In the kitchen, the officers found a plate containing a suspicious white powder. Tests soon confirmed that it was a banned substance, adding concerns to the growing list of alarms surrounding Jason Lowe. However, even more critical was the police decision to investigate the garage and the vehicle Jason owned. Initially, Jason tried to argue that the garage was a shared space requiring other people's permission to enter, but he eventually allowed the search to proceed, perhaps realizing he had no legal grounds to refuse access. The moment detectives stepped into the garage, they noticed Jason's Audi was spattered with mud, and part of the bumper appeared severely damaged, as if it had been ripped off by force. This immediately sent chills through the investigators, raising the possibility that the car had been driven off-road, perhaps in an attempt to dispose of something or someone. The police also detected the unmistakable odor of decay. Digging further, law enforcement opened the trunk, where they discovered the broken-off bumper and what looked like dark stains, potentially blood. When a special luminol-based substance was applied to the trunk's surfaces, it reacted by glowing blue, a classic indication of blood residue. Worse yet, The pattern and amount of blood strongly suggested that Jesse Bardwell had been severely injured, or worse. The father, who had been kept updated on every finding, could barely contain his anguish. The police pressed Jason for explanations, but his excuses grew less and less coherent. He vaguely claimed that he had been out looking for Jesse and had gotten the car stuck in mud, snagging the bumper on a bush. Yet, he could provide no sensible reason for the bloodstains in the trunk, nor did he clarify how the suspicious white powder ended up in his kitchen. Once forensic experts confirmed that the quantity of blood found inside the car was significant enough to indicate fatal harm, the investigation took a new direction. Jesse's case, previously treated as a missing person scenario, was officially reclassified as a homicide. The police, fearing that the main suspect might escape, decided to arrest Jason Lowe on charges of trafficking illegal substances, which at least allowed them to keep him in custody and continue to piece together evidence in the case of Jesse's disappearance. During interrogations, Jason clung to his story. He insisted that he was being set up and claimed ignorance regarding Jesse's fate. When investigators showed him a photograph of Jesse in happier days, he looked at it with an unsettling lack of emotion, refusing to shed any real light on what had happened to her. On May 19th, the prayers of Jesse Bardwell's friends and family were answered in a heartbreaking way. Her body was located, confirming that she was deceased. Although the discovery devastated her loved ones, it at least brought them a kind of closure, allowing them the chance to grieve openly and say their final goodbyes. For Jesse's father, Gary Bardwell, this news was both agonizing and a grim validation of his worst fears. He found himself compelled to view his daughter's autopsy report, painful as that was, because he felt he had a duty to know exactly what she had endured. What he learned appalled him. His daughter's remains, barely recognizable as human, had been wrapped in a sheet and treated like garbage, tossed aside with no regard for her dignity or worth as a person. Driven by a desire to bring Jessie home and lay her to rest, Gary turned to some of his dearest friends and former colleagues for assistance. They arranged for a funeral hearse and, with care and respect, loaded Jessie's body so she could finally return to her hometown. The gravity of her loss touched many hearts. Roughly 1,000 people came to the First United Methodist Church to honor Jessie and offer condolences. A year passed, and Jason Lowe, the young man accused in Jessie's death, remained in McKinney Jail in Texas, his cooperation with the investigation lukewarm at best. Despite his reluctance to reveal details, law enforcement eventually gleaned two critical pieces of information related to Jessie's final days. First, Jason insisted that everything had been some sort of accident, maintaining he would divulge more details in court, presumably aiming to earn the jury's empathy or understanding. This strategic ambiguity made it more challenging for the prosecution to present a decisive argument, something that undoubtedly pleased Jason's defense attorney, Andy Farkas. The second significant piece of information stemmed from the tip that guided authorities to Jessie's remains. Despite initial speculation that this clue came from an unknown individual, it turned out to have originated from Jason himself. After months of delays, legal motions, and investigative procedures, Jason Lowe's trial finally began. Gary traveled to Texas, determined to see justice served on behalf of his daughter. Once in court, prosecutor Cynthia Walker wasted no time painting a portrait of the defendant, describing how Jason often came across as a man with a serious substance abuse problem, prone to frightening outbursts of anger. This history, noted the prosecution, made it all too plausible that Jessie's death had come at a volatile moment. To bolster their case, prosecutor Wes Wynn introduced testimony from some of Jason's former girlfriends. Each recounted disturbing tales of jealousy, intimidation, and violence. Some spoke about how he made them cut ties with loved ones, effectively isolating them from any support system. Still others described how he lied about finances, relationships, and aspirations, skillfully weaving falsehoods that kept people off balance. It was consistent with what the prosecution insisted had happened to Jessie. These other women had managed to escape, though not easily, and sometimes only by employing elaborate subterfuge or planning in secret. For many in the courtroom, hearing these stories revealed the dangerously manipulative nature hidden behind Jason's outwardly charming demeanor. Lowe, in response, attempted to show remorse and attribute his behavior to a troubled past. He maintained that, despite occasional relapses, he had fought to stay on track academically, eventually earning multiple degrees and landing a respectable position with a well-known global technology firm. He presented his relationship with Jessie as a genuine love story, claiming he truly wanted to build a life and a family with her, even promising to help her achieve her dream of opening her own salon. Nevertheless, the prosecution underlined a starkly different image of Jason, a man unrepentant, even callous, about the death of his supposed beloved. According to the forensic timeline, Jessie's death likely occurred between May 1st and May 3rd, aligning with the last time neighbors, the Jordans, had seen her alive. Investigators concluded that a heated altercation between the couple culminated in Jessie losing her life, either through direct violence or circumstances the defense would conveniently call an accident. Rather than summon an ambulance or notify the authorities, Jason, it appeared, dragged her body into the garage, placing her in the trunk of his Audi. She remained in that macabre state for several days. The trunk contained extensive blood residue, confirmed by forensic testing to be Jessie's. An even more chilling revelation emerged. Jason had wrapped Jessie's corpse in one of his own sheets, part of a bedding set still on his bed when officers searched his home. Even after leaving Jessie's body in the Audi, he evidently had no qualms about sleeping on the same patterned sheets from which he had taken one to enshroud her. To make matters worse, his personal life after Jessie's death was anything but subdued. He continued meeting other women, engaging in sexual relationships, and sending explicit photos. Efforts he explained away by saying he was trying to distract himself from the tragedy and using substances to numb his conscience. A significant break for the investigators came from an undercover arrangement with Tommy Jordan, an acquaintance of Jason's. Detectives asked Tommy to speak with Jason and prod him for information while the conversation was monitored. In that discussion, Jason admitted to making a terrible error and indicated that Jessie's death resulted from an accident for which he bore some culpability. From a legal standpoint, this admission was effectively a confession of wrongdoing, despite Jason's attempts to couch it in terms of criminal negligence rather than murder. At trial, Jason finally presented his version of events. He claimed that he and Jessie had consumed some kind of pill on the night she died, something intended to heighten libido, and then became intimate in the shower. He alleged that he slipped, causing Jessie to fall too. She supposedly struck her head on the edge of the tub, after which she complained of feeling dizzy and overheated. According to him, Jessie refused the suggestion of an ambulance, believing rest might help her recover. The next morning, he maintained, he found her unresponsive, lying against him without a pulse. Panicked and paranoid about being wrongly accused, Jason said he decided not to contact the authorities. Instead, he left Jessie's body in the car for days before transporting her to a rural farm, covering her in trash and dirt. However, the medical examination painted a far more violent reality. Jessie's body showed signs of a head injury that surpassed the sort of minor trauma one might expect from a simple slip in a shower. In addition, she had other injuries that forensic experts interpreted as signs of physical assault. The conclusion was clear. The accident story was filled with contradictions and improbable details meant to minimize Jason's accountability. After a thorough presentation of evidence from both sides, the jury deliberated for approximately 6 hours. In the end, they found Jason Lowe guilty. Judge Scott Becker handed down a 50-year prison sentence. Per the arrangement, he will not be eligible for parole before 2041.
I need Dakota County 911.
This is him. What's wrong, dear?
Listen, 681 Swan Johnson Road. Somebody has my daughter. Somebody in full camouflage got Holly. I grabbed her and took her to the woods.
They approached him for help in disposing of a young woman's body. In the bed of a truck lay a human figure wrapped in a blanket. As they drove down the road toward the remote spot by the river, one of the participants recalled what he had done to the woman in the barn. He admitted he had assaulted her and claimed that the other 2 men had also taken advantage of her. This grim boasting set a sinister tone for what was to come, When they finally arrived at the desolate location, they pulled the woman's body out of the truck and laid it on the ground. At that moment, they noticed her legs seemed to twitch. Even more chilling was the faint moan that came from beneath the blanket she was wrapped in. One of the men retrieved a gun from his vehicle and shot her in the head 3 times, leaving no chance of survival. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most harrowing and deeply tragic cases that will send chills down your spine. This is the story of 20-year-old Holly Lynn Bobo, a Tennessee girl who vanished from her own home, a place where she should have been safe. Her disappearance not only devastated her family, but left an indelible mark on the entire region. Darden, Tennessee, is a tiny town that barely registers on most maps, no more than a modest stop along Highway 412 in Decatur County. With a population of around 3,000, the landscape around Darden is a mix of vast fields, dense woods, and stretches of farmland that seem endless as you drive through. Holly Lynn Bobo dreamed of dedicating her life to helping others, reflecting her deep sense of compassion and empathy. Aspiring to become a nurse, she planned to make a meaningful difference in the world. She was the daughter of Karen and Dana Bobo and had an older brother, Clint, who was 5 years her senior. Holly's mother, Karen, taught at Scotts Hill Elementary School, while her father, Dana, was well known in town for his kindness and willingness to help neighbors with everything from car troubles to minor home repairs. Holly's personal life was also filled with hope and promise. She had been in a serious relationship with a young man named Drew Scott. They took joy in simple pleasures, walking near the farmland as the sun set, or talking about their aspirations for what life would look like after Holly completed her nursing studies. Drew had given Holly a promise ring, reflecting their shared intention to eventually take the next step in their relationship and build a future filled with love, mutual respect, and the stability that both craved. On the morning of April 13th, 2011, Holly's typical day began even earlier than usual. Determined to do well on an 8 a.m. exam, she was already awake by 4:30 a.m., poring over her notes and textbooks at the kitchen table. Karen, preparing to leave for her own day at school, had lovingly packed Holly's lunch. It was a routine they knew by heart. Holly studying in her pajamas, coffee mug at her side, and Karen quietly making sure her daughter had everything she needed. Right before Karen left, she kissed her daughter on the forehead, told her she loved her, and reminded her to do her best on the exam. It was a moment so ordinary and comforting that Karen could never have imagined the chaos that would soon unfold. By 7:30 a.m., Holly's boyfriend Drew was already up and actively pursuing one of his hobbies, turkey hunting on Holly's grandmother's land. He gave Holly a quick call to see how her studying was going. The conversation was short, typical of two people with limited time to chat but wanting to hear each other's voices before getting on with their day. Soon afterward, Holly gathered her books, her lunch, and her essentials, and she stepped out onto the family's attached carport. It was nearly 7:45 a.m., and she intended to head to class at the University of Tennessee, where she had been diligently working toward her nursing degree. However, in the neighboring yard, James Barnes, a local resident well acquainted with the Bobo family, was startled from his own morning routine by unsettling sounds coming from the direction of the Bobo household. First, he heard what appeared to be a woman's voice yelling at someone to stop. The voice had a tone of urgency and fear that made James pause in his tracks. He instinctively looked into the edge of the woods near the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the commotion. However, the view was obstructed by thick tree growth, and the figures remained hidden from sight. Then, even more chillingly, James heard distinct screams echoing through the otherwise serene landscape. Alarmed and unsure of the source, James hopped into his vehicle to drive to work, but, concerned for his neighbors, he made sure to call his mother and ask her to contact Karen Bobo. James felt that something was drastically wrong. He had always known the Bobos to be a peaceful, church-going family, and hearing screams emanate from their property was unnerving in ways that words could scarcely express. Meanwhile, inside the Bobo home, Holly's brother Clint was awakened by the family dog's persistent barking. The dog, sensing a disturbance, was agitated enough to rouse Clint from a deep sleep. Feeling groggy and still disoriented, Clint listened and realized that there were unfamiliar voices outside, filled with what seemed like tension or conflict. As curiosity grew into concern, Clint moved to the window and raised the blinds, struggling to piece together what might be happening on his family's property. When he peered out, he caught sight of two figures near the garage, crouched in what looked like a charged discussion. One figure, shorter and petite, had Holly's build and blonde hair. The other was a taller figure, dressed head to toe in camouflage gear, something that automatically led Clint to assume it was Holly's boyfriend, Drew, because he knew Drew had planned to go turkey hunting that day. Still half asleep, Clint was confused, unsure whether this was a mere argument, an urgent conversation, or some misunderstanding. Not wanting to intrude on what could be a private moment, he decided to call his mom to clarify if Holly had changed her school schedule or if there was another reason for her to be outside at that time. Clint's calls to Karen repeatedly went to voicemail, so he sent a text, hoping for a quick reply. In the back of his mind, he assumed everything would be fine. Maybe Holly was just upset about something minor, or maybe she was simply saying goodbye to Drew before classes. However, alarm bells started ringing in Clint's head when he realized the commotion was a bit louder and more intense than a typical morning argument. At the same time, the mother of James Barnes, a neighbor of the Bobo family, after talking with her son, contacted Karen to convey what James had heard: an argument, screams, and altercation. The tension was palpable. Karen, upon receiving the alarming news, was immediately overwhelmed by a sense of dread. Something in her gut told her that this was not just an ordinary conflict or lover's spat. She quickly called home, and Clint answered. He seemed rattled, trying to piece together the situation. Karen asked whether Holly was at home or if she had left for school. Clint responded that Holly was outside with Drew, which made Karen's heart nearly stop. She knew in that very moment, Mother's intuition guiding her to a terrifying conclusion: that the man in camouflage might not be Drew at all. In a trembling voice, she told Clint, "That's not Drew. Call all the neighbors." She then sprang into action, rushing into the office at her workplace so she could dial 911. A wave of panic had seized her, and she knew time was of the essence. Everything that happened that morning, from Holly's early study session to Clint's confused wake-up to James Barnes's alarm, unfolded rapidly. In a span of minutes, an eerie realization had dawned on Karen. Her daughter might be in serious danger. "I can't recall the exact words that came out of my mouth at that moment," Karen later reflected with trembling emotion. "But I do remember someone mentioned Henderson County, and we live in Decatur County, so I think I literally collapsed onto the floor. It all became a blur after that. I believe I tried to call Clint, but I'm honestly not certain if I used the library phone or the office phone. He was still caught up in asking whether Holly was skipping school or if she'd gone turkey hunting with Drew. I just kept telling him, 'That's not Drew.' And at some point in my panic, I said, 'Get a gun and shoot him.' Clint, bewildered by his mother's frantic tone, asked for clarification. He wanted to know if Karen actually wanted him to shoot Drew. But before he could get any real answers, Karen hung up the phone in desperation. Left alone with his thoughts, Clint rushed to the back door of the house, hoping to see something that would clarify the confusion. What greeted him instead was a haunting sight. Holly and an unknown man walking steadily toward the woods behind their property. For reasons he couldn't quite comprehend, Holly was neither screaming nor physically dragged along. She appeared to be walking of her own accord, albeit under duress. Yet the sight was unsettling enough for Clint to remember his mother's urgent plea: "Get a gun." With his heart hammering in his chest, he hurriedly retrieved a firearm and stepped outside. As he crossed through the open garage, he was confronted by a chilling discovery: a puddle of blood near Holly's car. This horrifying clue fueled his alarm. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Clint immediately dialed 911 to report that his sister was being taken against her will. Simultaneously, Karen also managed to call emergency services, though in a flurry of panic, she could barely form coherent sentences. She enlisted the help of a friend to drive her home from work because she was too overwhelmed to get behind the wheel herself. By 8:10 a.m., law enforcement officers arrived on the scene, and Karen pulled in right behind them. Feeling an urgent need to do something, anything, Karen ran straight for the woods, calling out, "Holly, Holly!" Her voice echoed through the trees, but there was no sign of her daughter, no answer, and no indication of which direction Holly and the unidentified man might have gone. Before long, Dana, Holly's father, arrived to find the property swarming with authorities. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, was there alongside the FBI, SWAT units, and U.S. Marshals. From an outsider's perspective, it might have seemed reassuring to see so many agencies working together. Yet Dana found the scene to be disorganized and haphazard, with officials standing in clusters, appearing uncertain of what to do first. Growing impatient and desperate, Dana begged them, "Please, you have to find my daughter. You have to do something. Bring Holly back home." At this point, countless questions swirled in everyone's minds. Who had taken Holly? Was it a stranger or someone she knew from around Decatur County? The area was rural, full of thick forests and farmland, but neighbors generally recognized each other, or at least each other's vehicles. Dana couldn't help but confront the eerie possibility that Holly's abductor was familiar with her routine, understood the layout of their property, and used that knowledge to his advantage. Investigators wasted no time checking the immediate evidence. The bloodstain found in the garage was soon tested, and the results verified that it indeed belonged to Holly Bobo. If there had been any doubt that Holly's life was in imminent danger, that finding erased it. Word of Holly's apparent abduction spread quickly throughout Decatur County, prompting an entire community to rally around the Bobo family. Authorities utilized every resource they could, from bloodhounds trained to pick up human scents, to helicopters scouring open fields and tree canopies for any sign of the missing woman. Thousands of volunteers, friends, neighbors, and concerned strangers banded together to comb through miles of winding back roads, thick woods, and riverbanks, praying they would stumble upon a clue that might lead them to Holly. In the midst of this massive search, law enforcement tried to track Holly's cell phone to see if it would offer a clearer route of where she had been taken. The signals indicated that her phone moved across Decatur County, traveling north toward a wooded area close to Interstate 40, before it suddenly took a southern path via a different road. The phone's location data ended between 8:30 and 9 a.m., pinpointing the final ping near Gooch Road. That abrupt stop in signal was a chilling reminder that precious time was slipping away. Meanwhile, investigators also had to consider every angle, no matter how painful, including the possibility that someone inside Holly's own home was involved. This scrutiny inevitably fell on Clint, her brother, who had been the last known family member to see her alive that morning. Detectives examined Clint's story, noting that he mentioned seeing two figures and hearing strange voices before witnessing Holly vanish with the camouflage-wearing man. Although he cooperated fully, questions arose about the scratches found on Clint's body, which might have suggested a struggle. His computer was confiscated for analysis, his phone records pored over, and he had to endure 2 polygraph tests. Through it all, Clint maintained his innocence, stating firmly that he would never harm his sister and that he was simply following his mother's panicked instructions. After extensive questioning, searches, and those lie detector tests, authorities finally cleared him of any involvement. In the days and weeks after Holly vanished, more tangible reminders of her disappearance came to light. Along lonely stretches of local roads, search teams and passers-by discovered scattered items belonging to Holly. Pages of her homework and notes from classes, her cell phone, and even the lunch her mother had prepared that morning. Each of these finds delivered both heartbreak and a surge of hope. On one hand, each item was a stark reminder that Holly was no longer safely at home. On the other, finding parts of her belongings gave searchers renewed determination. They thought, if these items are here, maybe Holly is close by. As more weeks dragged on without any concrete answers, a handful of names began to emerge as possible suspects in Holly's abduction. Zach Adams, his brother Dylan Adams, their cousin Jason Autry, and their friend Shane Austin. In the eyes of most locals, These people had a reputation for being problematic people, and they were rumored to be involved in illegal substances and other illegal activities. Of the entire group of individuals initially scrutinized by law enforcement, one name loomed largest on the police radar: Zach Adams. Authorities were already aware of his extensive criminal history, which included multiple arrests on illegal substance-related charges, as well as robbery and assault. They also had documented evidence of a disturbing pattern of violence that set him apart from common offenders. One particularly shocking incident involved him actually shooting his own mother in the knee in 2004, followed by threats in 2005 to kill his grandparents, acts that left the community and even some of his distant relatives deeply unsettled. Given this backdrop, when Holly Bobo disappeared, Zach's name naturally rose to the top of the list of possible suspects. The police decided to pay him a visit, hoping that questioning him directly might yield some insights or confessions. Despite the fact that many in Decatur County, as well as neighboring counties, whispered about Zach's troubled reputation, he adamantly and repeatedly denied any role in Holly's disappearance. Sounding almost offended at the suggestion, he presented an alibi. On the morning that Holly went missing, he claimed to be at home with both his girlfriend, Rebecca Earp, and his brother, Dylan. Neither the local authorities nor the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, could find immediate evidence that conclusively poked holes in his story. Lacking enough proof to make an arrest, they had no choice but to let him walk free that day. As the focus on Zach momentarily reached a standstill, investigators shifted their gaze to another suspicious figure who also resided in Decatur County: Terry Britt. This registered offender lived in relatively close proximity to Holly's home, and his criminal resume painted a disturbing picture. He had spent a significant portion of his life behind bars for kidnapping and other serious felonies, including crimes often directed at young women. Even more alarming was Britt's documented history of gravitating toward victims who were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, features that bore a striking resemblance to Holly's own. Making matters even more suspicious, his residence in northern Decatur County seemingly overlapped with the general path indicated by Holly's phone records on the day she vanished. When the police knocked on Britt's door, they hardly had time to utter a word before he offered an unsolicited claim of innocence. "I'm not taking advantage of anybody," he insisted, effectively acknowledging the community-wide rumors linking him to Holly's disappearance. According to Britt, he was busy with what might seem like a mundane domestic errand on the morning Holly disappeared, purchasing a bathtub with his wife at a local salvage yard. Intriguingly, though, the store in question had no corresponding record of that sale. No paperwork, no recollection. Nothing. Authorities, driven by a mounting sense of suspicion, obtained a search warrant to dig deeper into Britt's property. They arrived equipped with cadaver dogs, hoping these animals might detect any trace of remains or evidence related to Holly's case. As it turned out, the dogs alerted to possible traces in 2 of Britt's vehicles and on several tools scattered around his residence. Investigators seized these items for thorough DNA testing, painstakingly cataloging every piece. Yet despite these promising signals, none of the laboratory analyses returned a smoking gun. No conclusive link to Holly. Desperate to extract any incriminating remarks that Britt might slip in private, law enforcement then escalated their tactics. They tapped Britt's phone, bugged his home, and carefully monitored his conversations, hoping he would admit something when he thought no one else could hear. But to the frustration of the authorities, the surveillance came up empty, and the unanswered question remained. Was Terry Britt truly innocent, or had he simply outmaneuvered investigators? Their doubts, however, deepened when a recording surfaced of a conversation involving Terry Britt and TBI agent Terry Dykes. In this disturbing exchange, Britt expounded on grotesque fantasies that seemed to mirror Holly's disappearance, bluntly objectifying a kidnapped young woman as if she were nothing more than a possession. He described her as young, pretty, perfect, somewhat, body, like a toy, and even took his warped scenario a step further, musing about what one would do after actually abducting her. If you keep it, you gotta feed it, you got to hide it, and if you kill, what are you gonna do with it? The graphic quality of these statements was enough to make even seasoned investigators recoil. Yet disconcertingly, it still wasn't enough to formally indict him. Terry Britt stuck to his narrative, maintaining that he had no hand in the abduction, and no irrefutable evidence tied him to Holly's disappearance. It didn't help that Britt's personal safe later turned up a handwritten check for the purported purchase of a bathtub. Faced with insufficient proof and stalled leads, the TBI ultimately decided they had to pivot away from Britt as their primary person of interest. Meanwhile, the emotional and financial toll of the investigation skyrocketed. Holly's disappearance became the single most expensive missing persons probe in the history of Tennessee, a testament to the sheer resources, both human and technological, devoted to finding any trace of the beloved nursing student. Day after day, law enforcement officers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from multiple counties scoured fields, combed through thick woods, and investigated any hint of a lead, however tenuous. Yet time marched on, and there was no tangible sign of Holly. It weighed heavily on everyone's minds that as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into years, the likelihood of finding her alive diminished. For 3 long years, the case appeared to have ground to a halt. Families across the county carried on with their lives, but the Bobo household remained locked in a state of perpetual worry and heartbreak, never knowing if or when they would see Holly again. Each passing day cast another shadow over the glimmer of hope. Then, as if on cue from a cinematic plot twist, a pivotal break occurred in February 2014. Zach Adams, the same Zach who had so vehemently denied any involvement in Holly's abduction, found himself in legal trouble yet again. This time, he was charged with robbery and for threatening his girlfriend's sister at gunpoint. The charges were severe enough to land him in jail, removing him from the general public. While Zach was behind bars, his brother Dylan Adams experienced his own brush with law enforcement for allegedly stealing firearms. Dylan's personal challenges were widely known. He had a recognized learning disability and an IQ that fell below the average range. His own grandfather noted that Dylan frequently mixed up events and facts when recounting stories, which sometimes made it difficult to separate truth from confusion. Despite these cognitive struggles, the state had deemed him competent enough to drive, and he held a valid driver's license. Eventually, Dylan reached a plea deal for the gun charges, which stipulated that he would be released under specific conditions. One notable requirement was that he live with a retired police officer, a friend of the Bobo family. 5 weeks after Dylan took up residence with the retired police officer, an arrangement stemming from his plea deal on firearm charges, an unexpected call to emergency services introduced an alarming new development in the already convoluted Holly Bobo investigation. During this call, Dylan asserted that he possessed critical information regarding Holly's ultimate fate, potentially breaking open a case that had long been mired in conflicting stories and elusive evidence. According to Dylan's account, on the morning of April 13, 2011, the same morning Holly disappeared, he saw her in Zach's living room. She was perched on a green chair wearing a pink shirt, clearly distressed, while 3 others were in the room: his cousin, Jason, their friend, Shane, and, of course, Zach himself. Dylan further alleged that these men had horrifically taken advantage of Holly and had even gone so far as to film their appalling acts. For more than 3 years, rumors and whispers had swirled around Zach, hinting that he made deeply unsettling jokes about Holly's disappearance. Some in Decatur County reported that Zach seemed almost cavalier, repeatedly bragging that law enforcement would never uncover the truth or find Holly's remains. Additional stories even surfaced about him boasting of having used Holly in unimaginable ways, suggesting he had filmed himself committing depraved acts against her, a claim that eerily echoed Dylan's disturbing revelations. Yet, despite all these rumors and Dylan's new statements, the alleged videotape remained stubbornly out of reach for law enforcement, who searched desperately for something concrete to tie Zach directly to Holly's disappearance and presumed murder. Distressingly, Zach's obsession with Holly appeared to extend beyond mere tasteless jokes. One of his ex-girlfriends came forward to recall how he had threatened her using Holly's name, telling her in chilling detail that he would tie her up exactly as he had tied up Holly Bobo so that no one would ever see her again. Nonetheless, because the purported videotape never surfaced and because Dylan recanted parts of his confession, claiming he felt coerced, investigators found themselves in a fog of uncertainty. Still, Dylan's statements were enough to prompt the arrests of him, Zach, Jason, and Shane. In a twist that added another emotional layer to the case, it emerged that both Zach and Jason had once sat in a classroom taught by Holly's mother, Karen Bobo, back in their elementary school days, making the story all the more disturbing for the entire family. On April 30, 2014, one of those suspects, Shane, was temporarily granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation with the authorities, presumably to shed light on the mystery of Holly's whereabouts and the roles various individuals might have played in her disappearance. However, within a mere 3 weeks, that immunity deal was abruptly revoked. Officials alleged that Shane had stopped cooperating and might even be hampering the investigation. With the deal withdrawn, the case seemed to circle back into a state of suspended progress, leaving the family and the community in agonizing suspense about whether there would be any real breakthrough in locating Holly. Then, on September 13, 2014, 5 months after Shane's immunity was rescinded, a local man named Larry Stone went out searching for ginseng in the woods, completely unaware that he was about to make a haunting discovery. Tucked away in that secluded location, he found fragments of human remains, including a skull and a separate container, described as a bucket that held more bones. The skull bore a bullet hole, a trajectory that began at the back and exited through the left cheekbone, painting a grim picture of violence. Over subsequent days, forensic testing confirmed that these remains indeed belonged to Holly Bobo. Also found were deeply personal belongings: undergarments, a purse, lipstick, pens, and even Holly's inhaler, all jarring physical reminders of a young life cut short under brutal circumstances. The subsequent court proceedings were emotionally crushing for Holly's loved ones.
You're standing there looking at remains that you know belongs to somebody that was loved, and you're sitting there looking at the ground and you're seeing your daughter laying there in her place. It hits home.
In a heartrending moment during the trial, Holly's mother, Karen, fainted when confronted with the sight of her daughter's recovered possessions, the weight of the reality striking her as almost too much to bear. The heartbreak intensified when, only a few months later, in February 2015, Shane, one of the 4 original suspects, was found dead in a hotel room, an apparent suicide that raised still more perplexing questions and left investigators scrambling to nail down the facts without his potential testimony. Meanwhile, the 3 remaining defendants, Zach Adams, Dylan Adams, and Jason Autry, spent 3 more years entangled in one legal proceeding after another, each entering a plea of not guilty to a litany of charges: kidnapping, criminal physical assault, and the murder of Holly Bobo. Throughout this prolonged legal saga, detectives, prosecutors, and TBI agents repeatedly pressed all 3 suspects, using every tactic in their arsenal to extract comprehensive confessions or locate new evidence that might finally unravel the long-standing mystery. In 2017, after maintaining his innocence for years, Jason Autry unexpectedly negotiated a deal with the prosecution. He agreed to plead guilty to aggravated kidnapping and solicitation to commit murder, receiving an 8-year sentence in exchange for his sworn testimony against Zach and Dylan at an upcoming trial slated for September of that year. During his testimony, Jason delivered a version of events that contrasted sharply with Dylan's earlier statements, casting further shadows on what really happened in Zach's living room on April 13, 2011. According to Jason, he arrived at Shane's house under the impression that they would be manufacturing illicit substances. Instead, he claimed he stumbled onto something far more horrifying, namely Zach, Dylan, and Shane already having kidnapped and savagely attacked Holly. Jason alleged that he observed Dylan burning certain items in a large barrel while Zach hovered near his pickup truck, exuding an air of tense urgency. It was then, Jason asserted, that Zach appealed to him for assistance in disposing of the body of a young woman. Jason said that in the back of Zach's truck lay a blanket-wrapped figure he was told was Holly Bobo. Jason demanded a form of payment for his help, specifically more of the substances he was seeking, and only then did he agree to help hide the body. On the way to this remote site by the river, Jason recalled that Zach displayed a disturbingly callous attitude, openly bragging about what he had done to Holly in Shane's grandmother's barn. According to Jason's recollection, Zach claimed he had forced himself on Holly and that Dylan and Shane had also taken advantage of her. This grim bragging set an ominous tone for what would unfold next. Once they finally arrived at the desolate spot, Jason stated that they dragged Holly's body out of the truck and placed it on the ground, only for him to notice something that filled him with dread. Her foot appeared to twitch. Even more chillingly, Jason heard a faint moan from within the blanket that wrapped her. Alarmed by these signs of life, he quickly alerted Zach. In response, Zach allegedly retrieved a pistol from his vehicle and fired 3 shots to her head, ensuring no possibility of survival. At that same moment, the group reportedly heard the sound of a boat engine nearby, prompting them to scramble in fear of discovery. Without wasting any time, they dumped Holly's body and drove away, leaving behind a grim scene. Not long after this violent incident, Jason alleged that Zach approached him with another macabre request, this time involving Zach's own brother, Dylan. The supposed motive behind this shocking proposition was to silence Dylan, who would not stop talking about what they had done to Holly. In return for eliminating Dylan, Zach promised Jason a share of his inheritance, which Zach expected to receive from his wealthy grandfather in the future. Jason admitted that he actually agreed to this plan and soon took Dylan out on the Tennessee River in a base boat, intending to shoot him and dispose of his body in the water. However, fate and an unsuspecting fisherman intervened. The fisherman recognized Dylan, knew his grandfather personally, and approached them. This social encounter forced Jason to abandon his deadly plan, and he would never attempt to kill Dylan again. Adding more layers to the mystery, Jason also claimed that Zach told him they had gone to Holly's house that ill-fated morning with the objective of stealing something, ingredients for manufacturing illicit substances. However, upon arriving earlier than intended, they encountered Holly, who screamed the moment she saw them. In a rash and reckless decision, they chose to abduct her rather than risk being identified. Despite these defense arguments, and the troubling fact that Zach's cell phone data seemed to place him somewhere other than Holly's last known location, a jury ultimately found Zach Adams guilty. On September 22, 2017, a conviction was handed down for the kidnapping, assault, and murder of Holly Bobo. Initially, the district attorney pursued the death penalty, but Zach negotiated a plea deal that allowed him to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole rather than face a potential death sentence. Time did not stand still after Zach's sentencing, however. In 2022, 5 years after his conviction, Zach petitioned for a new trial. He argued there had been errors in the legal process and sought another chance to prove his innocence, or at least to secure a different outcome. The Tennessee Court of Appeals rejected this request, effectively upholding his life sentence and leaving him to serve out his term for Holly's murder. Dylan Adams received a 35-year sentence, which he is currently serving. Meanwhile, Jason Autry, who had provided some of the most damning testimony against Zach, was released from prison in September 2020. A few hours later, police, accompanied by SWAT, arrived at the address. The front yard looked abandoned and desolate, with the first-floor windows covered by tattered curtains and no light visible inside. SWAT rushed inside, desperately hoping to find the victim alive, possibly tied up and imprisoned somewhere in the building. Methodically moving from room to room, officers found numerous items that instantly connected to the victim's property. Blood spatter could be seen on various parts of the walls and floor, clearly indicating signs of violence. Investigators also found a knife with dried bloodstains, along with torn fragments of bloody women's clothing scattered throughout the house. However, the most tragic discovery was in a trash can in the corner. Under dirty sheets and rags, police uncovered the lifeless body of a woman. The sight was so harrowing that even seasoned homicide detectives were shaken. Today, we will take an in-depth look at one of the most high-profile and violent tragedies in modern U.S. history, a case that continues to evoke shock and sorrow even years later. This heartbreaking story is not merely another tragic chapter in the nation's history of violent crime. It stands out because of the unimaginable brutality inflicted on 2 promising young men who unknowingly became targets of ruthless assailants. The case's notoriety stems not only from the heinous acts committed, but also from the extensive media coverage, the community's reaction, and the complex legal proceedings that ensued in the aftermath. At the core of this harrowing tale lies an unfathomable situation involving 2 completely innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals. The motive behind this heinous act was shockingly simple: a robbery that took a tragic, barbaric turn. Yet many remain puzzled by how a basic intent to steal could escalate into such an extreme show of cruelty and violence. Within the tangled web of events that unfolded, numerous questions emerged. Could the perpetrator's actions have been prevented at any stage by timely intervention? Were there signs that were overlooked or warnings that went unheeded? And was there any opportunity for the victims to escape or for law enforcement to have intervened in time? To answer these troubling questions, we must delve deeply into the specifics of the case, assembling the timeline of the horrific events, examining the role each perpetrator played, and exploring the ultimate question of whether this tragedy could have been avoided, potentially saving 2 bright young lives. At times, these details are almost too painful to absorb, but they are essential for understanding the gravity of the case and honoring the memory of those who lost their futures in a senseless act of violence. Channon Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. She was the younger of 2 children in a tight-knit family led by Dina and Gary Christian. In 1997, the Christian family relocated to Knoxville, Tennessee, seeking new opportunities and a more stable environment. Channon, who had inherited her mother's keen interest in psychology, grew fascinated by the idea of helping people in crisis, reflecting her compassionate upbringing. As a teen, Channon was outgoing and kind to everyone she met. She was also working part-time to save money for a personal goal she had dreamed of for years, buying her very own car. Recognizing her unwavering determination and wanting to reward her for her diligence, her parents and brother combined their resources to make her dream come true. On her 21st birthday, they surprised her by contributing funds toward the purchase of a silver Toyota, a car that she cherished both as a symbol of independence and as a milestone of entering adulthood. Christopher Newsom, universally known among friends and family as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom. He grew up in a large, loving family, enjoying the warmth and protection of doting parents, grandparents, and older siblings. From a young age, Chris excelled athletically, finding his stride in baseball during his school years. Coaches praised his agility and unwavering focus on the field, with one mentor predicting he had a real shot at playing the sport professionally someday. Tragically, a severe injury sidelined him. He required prolonged recovery, extensive physical therapy, and a grueling mental adjustment to accept that his dream of a future in baseball might no longer be within reach. Nonetheless, Chris proved resilient, channeling his energy into various hobbies and discovering new talents. Although he once harbored the ambition of becoming a mechanic, Chris ultimately found himself more drawn to carpentry as a possible vocation. After finishing high school, he enrolled at the University of Tennessee, known for both its academic rigor and spirited campus life, where he consistently ranked among the top of his class. His diligence and innate curiosity earned him a reputation for being an enthusiastic and open-minded learner. It was on the university campus in 2006 that Chris and Channon first crossed paths, meeting through a circle of mutual friends. Channon was just 21, and Chris was approaching his 23rd birthday. From the instant they met, those who witnessed their introduction sensed an immediate spark. Before long, the two became inseparable, spending nearly every spare moment together. Within just a month of dating, Chris, brimming with pride and excitement, introduced Channon to his parents, confiding that he saw a future with this caring, intelligent young woman. Moved by his sincerity and gentle spirit, Channon soon followed suit, bringing Chris home to meet her mother, father, and brother. The Christian family welcomed Chris warmly, delighted to see Channon so happy and secure. On January 6, 2007, Channon Christian, whose name was often spelled as Channon by close friends and relatives, and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party being thrown by a mutual friend. The celebration promised to be a cheerful gathering, with acquaintances from the university and beyond eager to toast the occasion. That Saturday morning, Shannon headed to a local beauty salon for some final touches before the evening event, excited to show off a fresh look. She parked her cherished silver Toyota in a nearby underground garage, which is where the couple agreed to meet so that they could drive together to the party. However, Chris was delayed, caught in an unexpected traffic jam after running errands. Time was ticking, and Shannon grew anxious as she hated to be late for social commitments, particularly one involving close friends. A slight argument ensued between the couple over the phone, with Shannon expressing frustration that they might miss out on a portion of the festivities. Nevertheless, both seemed intent on quickly resolving their disagreement and still making an appearance at the party. By the time the celebration was already underway, Shannon and Chris had not arrived, which sparked immediate concern among those who knew them well. The couple was widely recognized for their responsibility and courteous nature. It was unlike them to simply miss an event without providing any explanation or notification. Alarmed, friends tried calling and texting both Shannon and Chris, only to be met with silence. The group grew increasingly uneasy, fearing that some unforeseen mishap might have occurred. Attempts to reach Shannon and Chris on their phones that night proved frustratingly unsuccessful. The situation quickly escalated from mild concern to deep worry. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called Shannon's mother, Dina, late into the evening, hoping for an update or some reassurance that everything was all right. But each time, there was no response. The sense of helplessness grew with each unanswered call, and an unsettling feeling that something was amiss began to take hold. By the next morning, Dina woke to discover that her daughter still had not come home. Although this realization was alarming, she initially tried to comfort herself with rational explanations. Perhaps Shannon had decided to stay overnight at Chris's apartment after the party, which was not an entirely unusual occurrence. Since Shannon had a scheduled work shift on Sunday, it seemed plausible that she might have gone straight to her job from Chris's place, especially if they had stayed out late celebrating with friends. But Dina's calm facade quickly unraveled when she scrolled through her missed calls from the night before and noticed multiple attempts to reach her from an unfamiliar phone number. Returning the call, Dina was greeted by the anxious voice of Shannon's best friend, who explained that neither Shannon nor Chris had shown up at the birthday party, a fact which was highly out of character for both of them. On top of that, they were completely unreachable. No texts, no calls, and no posts on social media. Immediately, Dina's heart sank, and a sickening certainty set in, as though she could sense that something terrible had occurred. The dread only deepened with each passing minute of silence. Meanwhile, Chris's parents were dealing with the same unnerving mystery. They too had thought that their son might be spending time at Shannon's place, perhaps relaxing together before Sunday obligations. As the hours passed, they tried calling his phone, only to be met with an unbroken ringtone and no personal response. They soon discovered that Shannon had not shown up for work that day either, an unmistakable red flag for someone as diligent and reliable as she was. The parents of both young adults quickly agreed that something was gravely wrong. Worried beyond measure, they reached out to the police, hoping for an immediate and robust response. To their dismay, the reaction was lackluster. An officer casually suggested that Shannon and Chris might have chosen to spend some extra time alone, losing track of the clock and ignoring their phones in the process. Additionally, there was the familiar refrain. The department's protocol indicated that an adult was typically not considered missing for at least 24 hours without contact. Despite Dina and the Newsomes pleading for assistance, the authorities seemed reluctant to dedicate urgent resources to the case. This was a devastating blow, as every lost moment felt like an eternity. For Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours would prove to be critical in ways that no one could have fully anticipated. Refusing to remain idle, the parents, close friends, and extended networks of the young couple launched their own informal search operations. They doggedly called everyone they could think of, including classmates, colleagues, and neighbors who might know the couple's whereabouts or last movements. They combed through local hospitals in the hope that an accident victim matching Chris or Shannon's description might have been admitted. Despite this flurry of activity, No useful information surfaced about where Shannon or Chris could have gone. Friends and acquaintances who had seen Shannon at the beauty salon on Saturday offered only a few details. The hairstylist mentioned that Shannon had been eagerly discussing the birthday party and seemed in a rush to make it there on time. She gave no indication of any additional errands or stops in her plans. This left the parents and friends in the dark as to what could have transpired between the salon appointment and the moment the couple seemingly vanished. By the time Monday, January 8th arrived, law enforcement finally stepped up its role, starting a formal search for the missing duo. Officers conducted interviews, requested surveillance footage from businesses, and began collecting statements from anyone who might have encountered the couple. However, the slow initial response meant that a crucial window of time had already been lost. Still, thanks to the tireless efforts of Shannon and Chris's families and friends, much of Knoxville and its neighboring communities had become aware of the couple's disappearance. Everyone from local TV stations to college bulletin boards displayed their photos, urging the public to call police or a designated tip line with any hint or lead. The day before, on Sunday, the city's rumor mill had started humming with disturbing chatter about a grisly discovery near some railroad tracks. Nothing had been confirmed, and the authorities were tight-lipped, but stories circulated that a railroad worker had stumbled upon badly damaged human remains. At first, many assumed it must be an unrelated tragedy. Perhaps a lone victim struck by a train or attacked by unknown assailants. Nevertheless, word spread quickly, and people began to fear that this horrifying find might be connected to Shannon and Chris's inexplicable disappearance. As it turned out, those rumors were not unfounded. The railroad worker, completing his routine inspection of the tracks, had been horrified to discover what appeared to be a human body lying in an embankment along the railway. The remains were in an unspeakable state, bearing multiple injuries and signs of a deliberate attempt at burning, as if the perpetrator or perpetrators had tried to obliterate evidence or conceal the victim's identity. The worker immediately reported the gruesome scene, prompting local law enforcement to rush in and cordon off the area. Investigators photographed every inch of the scene, searching desperately for significant clues like discarded materials, footprints, shell casings, or any other physical evidence that might link a suspect to this heinous act. Once they completed preliminary documentation, the officers had the remains transported to the morgue for a thorough autopsy. The goal was to determine both the cause of death and any identifying characteristics that might match a recently reported missing person. However, the extent of the damage, caused by severe trauma and the attempted burning, suggested that identification would be extremely challenging. Criminalists, forensic pathologists, and investigators braced themselves for the likelihood of a long, painstaking process, including the possibility of using dental records if any teeth remained intact, or even advanced DNA testing. Despite these obstacles, forensic experts were able to confirm several harrowing details about the victim's final hours. First, the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutally violent death. The presence of numerous injuries, many of them inflicted while he was still alive, led investigators to conclude that the killing had been both prolonged and sadistic in nature. Shockingly, almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or badly damaged, an indication of either extreme physical assault or an effort to obscure his identity. The autopsy revealed that he had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and once in the head. A final fatal shot. To add to the sheer horror, forensic testing detected seminal fluid from at least 3 different men within the victim's body, as well as lacerations and tears consistent with repeated sexual assault. The level of brutality was almost unfathomable, even to seasoned investigators who had seen their fair share of homicides. Given that the police were reviewing reports of missing young men, it did not take long for them to note the strong similarity between the victim's approximate age, height, and build, and the description provided for Christopher Newsom. Still, they needed more concrete proof. They reached out to Chris's parents, explaining the grim discovery and requesting DNA samples for comparison. Although they could not say with total certainty that the body was indeed Chris, the police made it painfully clear that the evidence strongly suggested a match. To spare Mary and Hugh Newsom a deeply traumatic experience, the officers advised them against coming to the morgue for a visual identification since the charred and disfigured remains barely resembled human features at all. The final identification would depend on scientific methods rather than a direct viewing. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed beyond doubt that the remains found near the railroad tracks belonged to the missing student, Christopher Newsom. Forensic examiners performed multiple tests on the severely damaged body, comparing DNA samples gathered from Chris's personal items and from cheek swabs provided by his parents. This conclusive result delivered a devastating blow to the Newsom family and stunned those who had still held on to the belief that perhaps, by some miracle, Chris might be found alive and rescued from wherever he had vanished. Grief overwhelmed the household, with relatives and close friends arriving to comfort Chris's parents, who now had to endure the unimaginable reality that their beloved son had been brutally murdered. Despite this horrifying confirmation about Christopher's fate, Shannon Christian's parents, Dina and Gary Christian, continued to cling to the waning hope that their daughter was still alive. They refused to consider the possibility that she too might have fallen victim to the same gruesome end. Their resolve was bolstered by a small but significant clue. Shannon's mobile phone had last been pinged on the day she and Chris disappeared, in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, an area with a higher crime rate and a reputation for illicit activity. This location was a place Shannon and Chris would have had no reason to visit under normal circumstances, reinforcing the theory that they were taken there against their will. Believing that Shannon could be held captive nearby, the Christians urged law enforcement to pursue every possible lead in that part of town. Their fervent hope was that she might still be alive and hidden in an abandoned building, basement, or other makeshift location until someone, perhaps the authorities, found the right tip or stumbled upon the correct address. They prayed that time had not run out and that somehow Shannon could still be saved. In a secluded alley of this very neighborhood, investigators discovered Shannon's Toyota SUV abandoned in a state of utter disrepair. When her parents were notified of the discovery and shown the vehicle, they scarcely recognized it as their daughter's car. The once shiny exterior was now filthy and covered in scratches, with broken headlights and deflated tires. Inside, the scene was equally distressing. All of Shannon's personal belongings were gone, and the interior reeked of cigarette smoke. Cigarette butts lay strewn across the floor. The seats were torn and stained, and there was a general air of wanton vandalism throughout. Even the steering wheel bore scratch marks and embedded grime, as though a group of strangers had used the car with reckless abandon. One noticeable detail caught the investigators' attention. The driver's seat had been pushed so far back that it suggested a large adult male might have been the last person to operate the SUV. A crucial piece of evidence emerged in the form of a crumpled envelope lying on the floor between the front seats. Upon closer examination, the detectives noted that it bore an address on Chipman Street, just a few blocks away from where the car had been left. It seemed likely that the envelope had been dropped or accidentally left behind by one of the perpetrators, someone perhaps careless or in a hurry to vacate the vehicle. Following this lead, the police began questioning local residents who might have seen Shannon's SUV driving through the area. A local witness recalled that on that fateful Saturday evening, he had seen 4 African-American males riding in a silver SUV that looked out of place in that part of town. When the authorities lifted fingerprints off the envelope, they discovered a match to Lamarcus Davidson, an individual with a serious criminal history who had been previously convicted for violent offenses. This match quickly elevated Davidson to a prime suspect. Investigators soon learned that he resided in a house situated in an industrial zone, adjacent to a vacant lot often used for illegal dumping. The property had a reputation for frequent comings and goings of unfamiliar people, and the neighbors had occasionally reported disturbances or loud noises emanating from the place. Within hours, the police, accompanied by a tactical team, converged on Davidson's listed address. The front yard appeared desolate. The windows on the ground floor were covered with shabby curtains, and no lights were visible inside. Knocking on the door produced no response. Officers announced their presence and gave repeated warnings, urging anyone inside to come out peacefully. Met with silence, they forced entry, hoping against hope to find Shannon alive, possibly bound and imprisoned somewhere in the building. Although they were prepared for a hostile confrontation, the interior was eerily quiet. Moving methodically from room to room, the officers discovered numerous items that instantly connected the property to both Shannon and Chris. First, they found Shannon's purse, partially emptied, lying in a corner. A stuffed toy that Shannon kept in her car for good luck was tossed onto a dirty mattress in one of the rooms. The fact that these personal effects were inside the house suggested a terrifying scenario in which both students had been brought there against their will. Additional items, including Christopher's headphones and his beloved baseball cap, lay on a table, chillingly solidifying the connection to the missing couple. Blood spatters were visible in various spots on the walls and floor, indicating signs of violent activity. Investigators also came upon a knife with dried blood traces, as well as torn fragments of blood-stained women's clothing, scattered in different parts of the house. However, the most tragic find was in the trash can that stood in the corner. Underneath dirty sheets and rags, the police uncovered Shannon Christian's lifeless body, wrapped in 5 separate trash bags and bound in the fetal position. The sight proved gut-wrenching, even for seasoned homicide detectives. Every inch of the scene spoke of extreme brutality, painting a nightmarish picture of what Shannon must have endured. Forensic experts examined her remains and estimated that she had likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th, just 2 days after her sudden disappearance. The condition of Shannon's body was so appalling that even veteran forensic specialists were shaken. Not a single area of her skin had been spared from the onslaught. She was covered with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. She had numerous lacerations in the genital area and signs of violence, as well as injuries to her mouth and throat, indicating repeated violations by several individuals. Shannon had also sustained a severe head injury likely inflicted by blunt force, as well as internal bleeding in her abdomen, consistent with violent kicking or stomping. Moreover, the assailants had subjected her to multiple stab wounds, although none were immediately fatal, and had extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her body, compounding her suffering. In one of the most disturbing aspects of this brutal crime, the perpetrators had attempted to destroy or obscure DNA evidence by dousing Shannon in household bleach, focusing in particular on her open wounds and genital areas. They also forced her to ingest bleach, an act of sheer cruelty evidently aimed at eliminating any traces that might link them to the crime. Ultimately, in an almost incomprehensible act of barbarity, Shannon, still alive at the time, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and shoved into the trash chute, buried beneath soiled linens and rags. Unable to free herself or cry out for help, she died slowly from suffocation and blood loss. A fate that underlined the heartbreaking reality that each minute mattered in the early stages of her disappearance. In the aftermath of this ghastly discovery, the property's occupant, Lamarcus Davidson, in whose home Shannon's mutilated body and Chris's personal effects were found, was labeled an immediate fugitive. A multi-agency manhunt began, with state and local law enforcement agencies pooling resources to locate Davidson before he could flee the region or inflict harm on anyone else. At the same time, investigators identified another suspect named Eric Boyd, after detecting his traces at the crime scene and in conversations with potential witnesses. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without any serious resistance. Once in custody, he wasted no time in distancing himself from the more egregious aspects of the crime. He claimed, in a bid to secure a plea deal or leniency, that he did not want to go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Under intense questioning, Boyd admitted to knowing where Lamarcus Davidson was hiding. According to Boyd, Davidson had taken refuge in a vacant home, one that was listed for sale and therefore unoccupied, making it a convenient makeshift hideout. Boyd himself led the police to the property, guiding them through back streets and quiet neighborhoods until they reached the house in question. When the SWAT team and detectives converged on the vacant residence, Davidson was caught entirely off guard. With no apparent plan for a confrontation and seemingly no place to run, he offered no resistance upon arrest. Officers handcuffed him on the spot, quickly reading him his rights and ensuring he was isolated from the public. The tension in the air was palpable, as the capture of Davidson brought both a sense of relief and a fresh wave of anguish for Shannon and Chris's families, who now had to grapple with the tragic conclusion of their search. By detaining Davidson and Boyd, The authorities hoped to untangle the full extent of the crime, identify any remaining suspects, and build a case strong enough to deliver justice for Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Notably, at the moment of his arrest, Lamarcus Davidson was found wearing sneakers that had belonged to the very student he was accused of murdering. This detail became another proof of his involvement in the kidnapping and assault of a married couple. It also added yet another layer of horror to an already appalling sequence of events, illustrating the brazen manner in which he retained items belonging to his victims. During the initial rounds of police interrogations, Davidson attempted to downplay his role, claiming that he was neither responsible for the murder nor the torture. Instead, he painted himself as a reluctant witness who had somehow been swept up in the crimes by dangerous associates. According to Davidson, the couple had allegedly come to his residence to purchase banned substances, implying that Shannon and Chris were partly to blame for their own tragic fate. Davidson insisted that a conflict erupted between them and his acquaintances, leading to violence that he supposedly wanted nothing to do with. He maintained that he fled the scene to avoid witnessing or participating in the brutality. However, as interrogations continued, 3 additional suspects emerged: George Thomas, a friend of Davidson's; Latalvis Cobbins, Davidson's half-brother, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. In total, 5 suspects were implicated in the disappearance and murder of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Law enforcement placed them all in separate holding cells for individual interrogations, ensuring that none of them could coordinate stories to obscure the truth, as each suspect tried to shift blame onto someone else. Fearing the harshest penalties, they accidentally revealed crucial parts of the overall narrative. Police investigators meticulously gathered these fragments, sorting out the chronology of events and reconstructing every perpetrator's role in the crimes.
She asked me what's going on. I said, I don't know. She asked me where her boyfriend is. I said, I don't know. She asked me, why were we doing this? I told her, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me. I don't have anything to do with this. Matter of fact, we're being held here against our will just like you are. The only difference is that you're tied up and we're not.
A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, had been released on parole just a few months prior to these atrocities, after serving time for previous violent offenses. By the winter of 2007, he was in dire need of money to finance his illegal activities, especially since he needed a vehicle to deliver illegal substances to his clients. Lacking any financial stability, Davidson formulated a plan to steal a car from an underground parking garage, rumored to have minimal security and no functioning surveillance cameras. It was under these unfortunate circumstances that Davidson and at least one accomplice wound up in the same location as Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom, who were in the garage arguing over Chris's late arrival. This chance encounter proved to be a deadly twist of fate. Seeing that both students were vulnerable and that their car could serve his immediate need, Davidson made the chilling decision to leave no witnesses. Armed with a handgun, he and his accomplice forced Shannon and Chris into the trunk at gunpoint. From that moment, the victims' plight turned into a nightmare from which they would not escape. The perpetrators drove the couple to Davidson's house, where the students were beaten and subjected to repeated assaults. Investigators pieced together details suggesting that this initial brutality included physical attacks, forced sexual acts, and the unrelenting terror of being held captive in an unfamiliar home. Many of these details came out only later, during the suspects' fragmented confessions, and left even seasoned detectives stunned by the cruelty involved. Sometime after midnight, the suspects turned their attention to Christopher. Barefoot and stripped of clothing, he was again shoved into a vehicle trunk and driven to the nearby railroad tracks. There, under the cover of darkness, the perpetrators forced him to walk on the hard stones, likely to disorient him further or to inflict additional suffering. Without hesitation, they shot him twice in the back, leaving him gravely wounded on the ground. In a final act of brutality, they fired a fatal shot to his head, ending his life. Then, in an attempt to erase evidence that might tie them to the murder, they doused Christopher's body with a flammable liquid and set him on fire, hoping to destroy any physical clues that could link them to the crime scene. Having committed this shocking act, the criminals returned to the house, where Shannon remained bound and completely at their mercy. Over the next day, she was subjected to repeated unimaginable cruelty, a prolonged assault so savage that, according to forensic reports, no part of her body was left uninjured. The perpetrators eventually used household bleach to wash her body, a sinister effort to eliminate DNA evidence of the assaults. Although the legal proceedings for each suspect unfolded with slight variations, the central conclusion remained consistent. The actions of Lamarcus Davidson, Latalvis Cobbins, George Thomas, Eric Boyd, and Vanessa Coleman represented one of the most shocking and vicious crimes in recent memory. In the end, every piece of DNA evidence, physical traces, witness statements, and confessions led back to these 5 individuals, dismantling their claims of innocence or marginal involvement. The court issued a verdict ranging from life to death.
What is the decision of the jury as to what the punishment should be with regard to those counts?
The punishment is death.
Police officers, accompanied by search dogs, scoured a vast city landfill in hopes of finding any clue that could definitively confirm the grim fate of a pregnant woman. This landfill stretched over a huge area filled with more than 4,000 tons of solid waste. From the very start, their mission felt like searching for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Indeed, it seemed nearly impossible to find something as small as a scrap of clothing, let alone the remains of a missing woman. Nevertheless, despite the daunting odds, the officers persisted, methodically combing through endless heaps of discarded trash. Day after day, their dogs sniffed out even the faintest hint of human remains. Weeks turned into months, and morale sometimes wavered under the oppressive heat and the sheer volume of waste. Then, after 2 full months, a breakthrough changed everything. One of the lead detectives spotted a discolored, tangled mass that appeared to be human hair. On closer inspection, they realized it was not just hair. It was part of a severely damaged human body. Thanks to a combination of dental analysis and other forensic methods, experts ultimately confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to pregnant Lori Hacking. Imagine, if you will, the picture-perfect couple. 2 people deeply in love, united in marriage, and joyfully expecting their first child. Their life appears to be on the brink of a new and blissful chapter. Then, in the blink of an eye, that bright image is shattered, leaving only confusion and heartbreak. The enchanting wife abruptly vanishes. The devastated husband is left in a haze of despair. The police, despite their best efforts, cannot find any immediate explanation for what happened. This is where our story begins. The story of Mark and Lori Hacking, 2 young, successful, and seemingly happy individuals whose life together was admired by everyone around them. Yet, one fateful July morning in 2004 would redefine everything. Lori went out for a jog and never returned. Mark Hacking came into the world on April 24, 1976, in the city of Orem, Utah, in the United States. He was the 5th child in a devoted and deeply religious Mormon family headed by Doug and Janet Hacking. With 7 children in total, 4 sons and 3 daughters, the Hacking household was vibrant, active, and guided by the principles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This strong affiliation with the Mormon faith shaped every aspect of family life, from daily prayers and church attendance to communal gatherings where faith and family were at the center of every conversation. Doug Hacking, a respected pediatrician with a well-known medical practice, provided for his large family's every need, ensuring they enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and a well-regarded social standing within their community. Growing up, Mark was easily recognizable by his bright red hair, smattering of freckles, and friendly, outgoing demeanor. Whether it was in church youth gatherings or casual neighborhood events, young Mark was at ease, striking up conversations, cracking jokes, and making people feel instantly at home around him. The Hacking children were all high achievers in their respective pursuits. Some excelled in academics, others in community service, so Mark constantly felt pressured to keep up with his siblings' accomplishments. Early on, he discovered that he could gain attention or avoid embarrassing situations by spinning small lies or exaggerations. These fibs started innocently enough, claiming he had scored higher on tests than he really had, or pretending he knew how to play a musical instrument better than he did. Over time, though, the tendency to fabricate stories became more entrenched, serving as a coping mechanism for Mark whenever he felt inadequate. When Mark turned 19, he followed the traditional path set out for many young men in the Mormon Church by embarking on a missionary journey. Initially, all seemed promising. His outgoing personality helped him connect with new communities, and he found success in drawing people to the faith. Fellow missionaries spoke of his easy rapport with strangers and his knack for storytelling, which, despite often being more embellished than strictly factual, proved compelling. Yet the bright veneer eventually cracked. After sunset, Mark would occasionally break mission rules by socializing, attending parties, and engaging in activities the church frowned upon. Word of these breaches in conduct soon reached his superiors. To shield both Mark and the family from public scandal, the church sent him home prematurely. Upon his return, Mark resorted to more deceit, insisting it was all a misunderstanding rather than a failing on his part. In stark contrast to the turmoil swirling around Mark's life, Lori Suarez's background seemed simpler and more grounded. She was born on December 31st, 1976 in California, in a significant event that would change her trajectory forever. 4-month-old Lori and her older brother Paul were adopted by Thelma and Harold Suarez. Lori's childhood was marked by both challenges and warmth. In 1987, after Thelma and Harold divorced, Lori moved to Utah with her mother, while Paul remained in California with their father. This separation made her mother-daughter bond grow even stronger, and throughout her teenage years, Lori would lean on Thelma for both emotional and practical support. Lori thrived socially at Orem High School, where her earnestness, kindness, and sincerity drew people toward her almost effortlessly. Classmates spoke of how she radiated positivity, whether through her warm smile or her willingness to stand up for others who felt left out. Elected class representative multiple times, Lori also found passion in sports, particularly baseball, where she dedicated countless hours honing her skills. Yet, life was far from lavish for the Suarez family. Lori had to balance her schoolwork, her extracurricular interests, and a part-time job at a local car wash to help her mother make ends meet. Even so, Lori never lost sight of her dream: to one day marry a boy from her church community, build a loving and stable home, and become a devoted mother to the children she hoped to have. Mark and Lori first crossed paths in high school. Despite being in different grades, they moved in overlapping circles within the Mormon youth community, attending the same dances, weekend outings, and religious study sessions. The spark that flared between them was immediate. People who knew them at the time recall how Mark could make Lori laugh like no one else, his humor and quick wit captivating her from the start. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared faith, mutual friends, and bonding over hopes for the future. By 1999, 22-year-old Lori and 21-year-old Mark decided to tie the knot, a development that seemed to delight everyone around them. Their families offered enthusiastic blessings, well-wishers from church praised their devotion to each other, and for a while, it appeared the Hackings were set to thrive both personally and professionally. Their marriage became something of a model union within their religious community. Mark was frequently observed showering Lori with small tokens of affection: flowers, heartfelt notes, or simple acts of kindness. Their joint commitment to their faith led them to teach Sunday school together, where they guided younger members in learning church doctrine. Mark, quick to offer help when parishioners or friends needed a hand, gained a reputation for generosity and service. Lori, meanwhile, completed her studies and landed a job as an assistant at bank. She was diligent and conscientious, applying herself fully to make a stable income for the household. According to Mark, he too was devoting himself to self-improvement, claiming to be enrolled at the university, chasing academic distinction that would elevate their combined future prospects. But this vision of marital and professional harmony existed only on the surface. In a secret that Mark guarded as closely as any he had told before, He had actually dropped out of college back in 2002. Rather than confronting Lori or admitting the truth, he concocted an elaborate charade. Each morning, he would gather his textbooks and leave their home as though heading to campus, sometimes even discussing fictitious classes or imagined professors at the end of the day. Once Lori herself departed for her job at bank, Mark would quietly slip back home, spending the day doing whatever he pleased, reading, playing games, or simply biding his time, before emerging in the late afternoon to return from his alleged lectures. This persistent masquerade spoke to a deeper dysfunction in Mark's psyche, one that grew from a need to be admired, to measure up to perceived expectations. Meanwhile, Lori remained entirely in the dark about his deception, trusting that her husband's words aligned with reality. She continued to labor at her job, saving money for the future they believed was just around the corner. The start of a new life with a baby on the way, a possible move for Mark's postgraduate opportunities, and the promise of an ever closer bond nurtured by their shared faith. All day long, Mark would hole up in the apartment to play video games, immersing himself in fictional worlds while keeping up the charade that he was engaged in serious academic work. Whenever Lori came home in the evening, he would dramatically complain about the many hours he had supposedly spent wrestling with difficult coursework and demanding professors. To underscore his claims, he would sometimes lock himself in a small side room under the pretense of writing papers or completing online exams. This performance further convinced Lori and any friends who came by that Mark was genuinely investing his days in rigorous study, forging a path toward graduation. Sometimes, as part of his ruse, Mark went so far as to arrange rendezvous with Lori on the university campus. On these occasions, they might meet at the student center or pass each other in a corridor as though Mark was on his way to a lecture. He would even point out certain buildings or classroom locations to make everything seem even more believable. This clever choreography gave Lori no reason to doubt him. She had always supported Mark's aspiration for higher education, and she took pride in believing that her husband was on track for a meaningful career. When the time finally came for Mark to graduate from the university, an event that Lori had been joyfully anticipating, he came up with yet another deception. He feigned an illness on the day of the graduation ceremony. He claimed a sudden high fever or a bout of food poisoning prevented him from attending the official walk across the stage. Lori, truly concerned for his health, wholeheartedly believed him. She, along with other family members, decided to host a small celebration later on, hoping to honor his accomplishment once he felt better. To keep up appearances, Mark posed for photos in a rented cap and gown, using a photo editing application to insert the image of a diploma in his hand. He even managed to produce pictures that vaguely resembled the backdrop of a real graduation event. Delighted and utterly convinced by these photos, Lori and the family cheered him on without suspecting a thing. Before long, Mark's claims escalated once more. He began describing supposed trips to various states around the country for interviews at medical universities, each with its own renowned program. The flights and lodging expenses, however, were largely funded by Lori, who spent the bulk of her own salary to underwrite his so-called future. She believed deeply in her husband's ambitions, seeing in him the potential to become a doctor who would follow in his father's footsteps as a respected medical professional. Mark's father, after all, was a pediatrician of high repute, and the family name carried a certain status. Lori's trust in Mark was so absolute that she never considered investigating these trips or asking to see any tangible acceptance letters. In 2004, Mark announced the biggest news yet. He had been accepted to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Medicine, specializing in oncology. He claimed to have received glowing references for his commitment and academic achievements. The news spread rapidly among friends and relatives, generating a flurry of congratulations and excitement. Both Mark and Lori spoke eagerly of their imminent cross-country move. They told people they wanted to settle down in North Carolina, where Mark would, in theory, deepen his medical knowledge and begin the next stage of his career. Determined to stand by her husband's side, Lori quit her steady job, an act that demonstrated her full faith in him and her willingness to make sacrifices to see him succeed. By July of that year, the couple hosted a heartfelt farewell party. Family members, church friends, and co-workers gathered to celebrate the bright future that seemed to lie ahead. Adding to the joyful atmosphere was the fact that Lori was pregnant, a development that made the upcoming move feel like a leap into a wonderful new chapter of their lives. Everyone who attended raised toasts to Mark's perseverance and Lori's unwavering support, remarking on how blessed they appeared, both personally and professionally. Yet, beneath this facade of happiness, an unsettling incident unfolded only a few days before they were supposed to leave. On July 16th, while at work, Lori received a mysterious phone call that left her visibly distressed. According to a few co-workers who saw her reaction, she looked pale and anxious when she hung up. Without offering any explanation, she hurried home, leaving those around her puzzled. She would not speak about what had upset her so deeply, and by the next day, she seemed determined to continue with the move as planned. At the farewell party held on July 18th, Mark and Lori again put on a united front. They smiled, posed for pictures, and thanked guests for their well wishes. No one at the gathering even hinted at suspecting that a terrible secret might lie behind all their positivity. On the morning of July 19th, 2004, 27-year-old Lori adhered to her usual routine. She enjoyed jogging in the Memory Grove area, often choosing the wooded trails for a more leisurely run. She had planned to head straight to her workplace afterward. The night before, she and Mark agreed that he would drive her to her office by 7 a.m., ensuring she arrived on time. However, when Mark woke up that morning, he realized that Lori was nowhere in the apartment. The bed was empty. Her usual belongings were not scattered around as they might be after a nighttime routine, and he simply assumed she was still out jogging. Feeling tired, he went back to sleep, only fully waking again at around 8. When Lori still had not returned by that time, Mark looked out the window and noticed her car was also gone. In his mind, the simplest explanation was that she had decided not to wake him, choosing instead to drive herself to work. Yet by 10:11 a.m., a creeping worry led him to call the police. During that call, Mark stated that Lori had gone for her morning run but never came home, emphasizing how uncharacteristic it was for her to deviate from her schedule or fail to check in. Soon after, he discovered that Lori's work uniform, carefully laid out the night before, remained untouched at home. This alarmed him enough to file a missing persons report at 10:30 a.m., officially telling law enforcement that something was seriously amiss. Police officers responded quickly, searching the area near Memory Grove Park. They discovered Lori's car parked near the entrance, yet there was no sign of any struggle or disarray inside the vehicle. It looked as though she had simply pulled in, locked up, and vanished into thin air. Mark, deeply distressed, contacted Lori's family and her co-workers to find out if anyone had heard from her. The unanimous response was that Lori was responsible, punctual, and not at all prone to impulsive or unexplained absences. In light of her pregnancy and her ordinarily reliable nature, alarm bells rang for everyone involved. Mark, along with friends and members of their church community, organized a search of the trails within Memory Grove Park, combing through wooded paths, undergrowth, and adjacent areas. But there was no sign whatsoever of Lori, prompting more intense efforts by local authorities. Almost immediately, detectives noticed discrepancies and peculiar circumstances that cast a shadow of doubt over the case. For instance, Lori's personal belongings, which included her purse with important documents, her wedding ring, and various key cards, had all been left behind at the couple's house. Investigators wondered why she would head out for a morning run without taking items she might normally keep close by, especially her wedding ring and her car-related keys. Further fueling their suspicions was the discovery of a brand new mattress in the bedroom, still with some of its packaging. Mark explained that he had thrown out their old mattress only a few days prior, allegedly because Lori had heavily stained it with blood during her menstruation. He claimed the stain was so severe that it was unsalvageable. When investigators pressed for details, asking where they had slept in the interim days before he bought a replacement, Mark mentioned that they had simply slept on the bare box spring frame, lacking an actual mattress to lie on. Another item that caught the detective's eye was a hunting knife found on the nightstand next to the bed. The blade contained blood traces, and when questioned, Mark insisted that he had used it the previous day for some mundane activity, perhaps cutting some food, leaving the residue behind. Yet the timing seemed remarkably suspect. Even more troubling was the discovery that Mark had purchased the new mattress that very morning, July 19th, at precisely 10:23 a.m., a mere 12 minutes after he first reported Lori missing. Police found the receipt inside his car, making it clear that he had been out shopping for a mattress almost immediately after claiming to be in a panic over Lori's disappearance. This series of odd coincidences formed the basis for the investigators' suspicions. Additionally, they noted the position of the driver's seat in Lori's vehicle. It was pushed far back from the steering wheel, suggesting that someone significantly taller than Lori had been sitting there. Given that Lori stood at about 5'3" and typically drove with the seat much closer to the pedals, the seat's position raised the question of who had last driven the car and why. All these strange details piled up, painting a bewildering picture. A wife who vanished without any of her usual belongings or personal effects, a freshly purchased mattress arriving almost in tandem with her husband's first frantic call to the police, a suspiciously placed hunting knife with traces of blood, and a driver's seat pushed far back in the missing woman's car. Neighbors, friends, and local news outlets began buzzing with speculation, while the police launched a more comprehensive inquiry. Were Mark's explanations plausible, or did they serve as a carefully orchestrated cover for something far more sinister? And how did this tie in with the suspicious phone call Lori had received just days earlier? At that point, no one knew if Lori's disappearance was voluntary or if she had fallen victim to foul play. Nonetheless, investigators quickly realized the importance of scrutinizing Mark's timeline of events and verifying every detail he provided. The detectives, determined to uncover every possible clue in Lori Hacking's disappearance, diligently examined every corner of the couple's home for evidence. In the course of their search, they made a startling discovery among Lori's personal notes. A letter addressed to Mark, in which Lori stated she would divorce him if he did not change his ways. This written message was as clear as it was devastating. It revealed that Lori, who had always been known as caring and responsible, was reaching the end of her patience. Given the letter's ominous tone and the fact that Lori had vanished under such suspicious circumstances, the investigative team's suspicions immediately narrowed to Mark Hacking. They needed to determine if he had played a direct role in Lori's disappearance, or if there was some other explanation for why she had suddenly dropped out of sight. The more they dug, however, the more incriminating information piled up against Mark. Police soon discovered that he had been living a life of relentless deceit. In stark contrast to the impression he had given his wife, family, and friends, Mark was not a rising medical student who had gained admission to a prestigious program in North Carolina. In fact, he had never even completed his undergraduate degree, having dropped out of college almost 2 years prior. Yet, day in and day out, he masked this reality with elaborate stories, meticulous lies, and outright forgeries. The most significant and grandiose of Mark's fabrications came to a head in mid-2004, when he proclaimed he had been accepted to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Medicine, focusing on oncology. This new claim took the family by storm, prompting celebrations and well wishes from all corners. Even more consequential was Lori's decision to quit her job, effectively sacrificing her stable income so they could make the move to North Carolina. A farewell party was held in July where guests brought gifts, toasted to the couple's supposed bright future, and showered the expectant parents. Lori was 5 weeks pregnant, with love and support. Everyone in attendance believed their story wholeheartedly, seeing them as a dedicated young couple stepping confidently toward a shared dream. But a moment arrived that would irrevocably change everything. On July 16th, just days before the planned move, Lori made a phone call to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to inquire about financial aid options and specific program details on behalf of Mark. During that conversation, she learned a harrowing truth. The school had no record of Mark Hacking, and there was no indication he had ever been admitted or even applied. Initially stunned, Lori sought further confirmation, hoping it might be an error or misunderstanding. She tried to cross-check facts, but each piece of evidence drove home the same conclusion. Her husband had fabricated yet another chapter in his elaborate web of lies. Realizing the enormity of Mark's deception, Lori felt betrayed and shattered. She had given up her job and was pregnant, believing wholeheartedly in the future Mark had painted for them. Overwhelmed by anger, sorrow, and disbelief, she wrote him a letter on July 18, clearly stating that she could no longer go on living in a relationship based on deceit. In that letter, she laid out an ultimatum, telling him she was prepared to leave him if he could not change. Despite her fierce love for him, Lori was not willing to resign herself to a life built on a lie, particularly not with a baby on the way. Feeling desperate and needing to confide in someone, Lori shared her predicament with her closest friend, but refrained from revealing everything to the rest of her social circle. As a result, most people, including family and mutual acquaintances, believed they were still the perfect couple. The contrast between the outward appearance of harmony and the private turmoil growing behind closed doors could not have been sharper. Witnesses reported hearing an argument in the Hacking household late in the evening on July 18, a heated exchange that suggested Lori had finally called Mark to account for his many lies. This tension set the stage for the events of July 19, when Lori suddenly and ominously disappeared without a trace. By now, the detectives had acquired powerful indications that Mark was the main suspect. The letter threatening divorce gave Lori a clear motive for confronting him, and Mark, who had built his self-image around misleading everyone, now had a dire reason to take drastic action. The investigation took on a darker cast when forensics confirmed that bloodstains on a hunting knife found in the couple's bedroom indeed belonged to Lori. Further examination uncovered more blood residue in the interior of Mark's car and in a nearby dumpster. The police also discovered a blood-soaked mattress that had been sliced apart, but despite these striking signs of violence, they initially lacked the ultimate proof of a homicide: Lori's body. In the days following Lori's disappearance, Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. On July 24th, authorities found him naked in a motel room, wearing only slippers and appearing to be in a state of deep mental distress. After evaluating him, professionals concluded that Mark might be feigning mental illness to evade responsibility. Sensing that he was rapidly losing control of the narrative he had so carefully spun, Mark allowed 2 of his brothers to visit him in the psychiatric facility. Perhaps feeling cornered or grappling with guilt, he finally broke down and disclosed a nightmarish confession. He admitted his years of duplicity, how he had lied about being in college, lied about attending medical school interviews, and how, on the night of July 19th, he had shot Lori in the bedroom while she slept. She had been 5 weeks pregnant. Mark claimed that he believed this to be the only way to stop Lori from exposing his deceptions, which had escalated beyond his ability to contain them. In a chilling step-by-step account, Mark revealed that he had disposed of Lori's body and the blood-stained knife-cut section of the mattress in different dumpsters. Early in the morning, he had driven Lori's car to a nearby park to stage the illusion that she had gone out for a run and never returned. Then, he placed a phone call to the police, feigning panic and concern to solidify his story. Mark's brothers, horrified by his confession, immediately passed the information on to the authorities. Armed with Mark's own words, investigators finally had what they needed to place him under arrest on August 2, 2004, charging him with suspicion of murder. Yet the detectives still faced one massive challenge. They did not have Lori's body. The entire case's resolution depended on recovering it to provide tangible proof of Mark's guilt and to give Lori's family a measure of closure. Spurred on by Mark's admission that he had used dumpsters, law enforcement teams sifted through vast amounts of refuse in landfills and collection sites, determined to locate any identifiable remains or possessions linked to Lori. The community, horrified by the possibility that this vibrant young woman had met such a grim fate, watched in anguish as search crews worked day and night to uncover the truth of what really happened to Lori Hacking. Police officers armed with search dogs descended on the sprawling city landfill, determined to find any trace that might finally confirm the grim fate of Lori Hacking. This landfill, covering a massive area with more than 4,000 tons of solid waste, was the designated drop-off point for refuse from the very dumpsters Mark Hacking had used to dispose of incriminating evidence. From the outset, the undertaking resembled an attempt to locate the proverbial needle in a haystack. A mountain of garbage towered around them, battered by the elements and compactor machines. Indeed, it seemed all but impossible to recover anything as small as a shred of clothing, let alone a missing woman's remains. Yet, despite the daunting odds, officers persisted, methodically scouring through countless piles of discarded debris. Day after day, their dogs sniffed for even the faintest hint of human remains. Weeks stretched into months, and morale sometimes flagged under the oppressive heat and the sheer volume of waste. Then, on October 1st, 2004, fully 2 months after Mark's startling confession, a breakthrough occurred that would change the direction of the investigation forever. One of the lead detectives noticed a discolored, matted clump of what appeared to be human hair. On closer inspection, they realized it was more than just hair. It was part of a severely damaged human body. Although the remains were in such poor condition that identifying distinct features or determining a cause of death immediately was out of the question, forensic experts quickly took possession of the fragments for thorough testing. Through a combination of dental analysis and other forensic methods, the examiners ultimately confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Lori Hacking. The news shocked the entire community and made official what many had already feared: that Lori's disappearance was no innocent accident or random tragedy, but a deliberate crime. While the body's condition rendered it impossible for the coroners to specify an exact cause of death, the fact that Lori's body had been dumped in a landfill and left to decay in anonymity bore out the investigators' initial suspicions. Mark Hacking, driven by his desire to maintain the elaborate fiction of his life, had indeed murdered his pregnant wife, then callously disposed of her remains. In the eyes of the police, this discovery was the final piece of evidence that solidified Mark's guilt. He had already confessed, yet a bizarre new twist emerged. The suspect abruptly refused to enter a guilty plea. Perhaps facing the looming specter of life behind bars led him to gamble on a more advantageous legal strategy, or perhaps he still clung to some last-ditch hope of escaping the full weight of the law. Whatever his thinking, it ran counter to everything Lori's grieving family wanted. They pleaded with Mark, urging him to plead guilty and spare everyone a protracted, agonizing trial that would dredge up painful details. Eventually, Mark relented. He struck a plea deal with the prosecution, a decision that carried significant consequences for how this tragic case would be resolved. On April 15, 2005, Mark Hacking, by then notorious for both his lies and the cruelty of the crime, stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to the charge of murdering Lori and concealing her body. In accordance with Utah state law at the time, he received a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole. Initially, that possibility could come after a minimum of just 6 years, a detail that horrified many people who followed the case. The idea that anyone who killed his pregnant wife could be eligible for parole after just 6 years seems shockingly condescending. Yet it was the maximum penalty allowable by the statute as it existed. Recognizing the brutality and gravity of the offense, however, the Utah Parole Board soon clarified that Mark would likely spend at least 3 decades behind bars. Under their guidelines, the earliest year Mark could even submit a parole application would be 2035, meaning he would remain incarcerated well into middle age. In the early hours of New Year's Eve, the quiet routine of the Coughlin household was abruptly shattered by a tragedy that would later become the focus of true crime stories and documentary features. The stillness of the morning was pierced by a frantic phone call to the Manhattan police station. The voice on the line belonged to Rod Coughlin, trembling with emotion and hysteria. Struggling through tears, he relayed a chilling discovery. He had found his wife, Sheely Danishevsky, lifeless in their bathroom. Rod described a horrifying scene. Sheely's body lay submerged in the bathtub, the water around her stained red with blood. The chilling details of the call sent shockwaves through the precinct, marking the beginning of a criminal investigation. This is a true crime and documentary case that took place in New York. It's about a young woman named Shayla Danishevsky, was born on October 14, 1969, into a loving and ambitious Jewish family in New York City. Her parents, both hardworking professionals, instilled in her the values of education, determination, and kindness from a young age. Sheely grew up in a close-knit household filled with warmth and laughter. She excelled in academics early, showing a natural aptitude for math and problem-solving. Her family valued cultural traditions, and Sheil often participated in Jewish community events and holiday celebrations. Growing up in the bustling city, she developed a strong sense of independence and resilience. She attended well-regarded public schools, where her teachers often noted her curiosity and leadership qualities. Despite her quiet demeanor, she was known for her fierce determination and ability to persevere through challenges. As Shayla matured, her drive for excellence extended beyond the classroom. She pursued higher education with an unwavering focus, eventually earning a prestigious degree in asset management. This accomplishment was not merely a reflection of her intellect, but also of her tenacity and dedication. The degree served as her passport to the highly competitive world of international finance. Before long, Sheil secured a coveted position in the Swiss banking sector, where she thrived. She demonstrated an innate ability to analyze financial markets and manage complex multi-million-dollar portfolios, earning her the trust and admiration of her clients. Her success was meteoric, and she quickly became a rising star in the industry. Despite her flourishing career, by 1998, Sheely began to sense an unshakable void in her life. She had achieved financial independence, lived in one of the world's wealthiest cities, and had the unwavering support of her family. Yet the dream of building her own family and embracing motherhood remained unfulfilled. This yearning grew stronger with each passing year. Determined to change her destiny, Sheely made the bold decision to take her future into her own hands. In February 1998, she attended a Jewish singles event designed to help professionals like her find their soulmates within the community. It was at this event that Sheely's life took a pivotal turn. Among the attendees was a 26-year-old man named Rod Kovlin, also a professional in the financial sector. Rod's youthful energy and sharp intellect immediately caught Sheely's attention. Despite the noticeable age difference, the two discovered a deep connection rooted in shared values and mutual ambitions. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, revealing a shared vision for success and stability in life. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and what began as a chance meeting quickly evolved into an intense and all-encompassing romance. Their relationship blossomed with remarkable speed. Rod and Sheely became inseparable, spending nearly every waking moment together. Their love story unfolded like a whirlwind, defying conventional timelines. While some acquaintances raised eyebrows at the rapid progression of their relationship, for Shayla and Rod, everything felt destined. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, the couple made the bold decision to marry. Their union was celebrated with joy and optimism, as friends and family gathered to witness the start of what appeared to be a promising future together. Soon, the couple had two beautiful children, a boy and a girl, into their lives, completing the family Sheely had always dreamed of. For over a decade, the Kovlin family appeared to live an idyllic life. Their Upper West Side residence was a picture of stability and comfort, filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of family traditions. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, tensions and challenges began to simmer. On the morning of New Year's Eve 2009, the peaceful rhythm of the Kovlin household was shattered by an event that would forever alter their lives. At approximately 7:30 a.m., a frantic phone call from Rod Kovlin to the Manhattan police station broke the early morning calm. Speaking through tears and hysteria, Rod reported a horrifying discovery. He had found his wife, Sheila, lifeless in their bathroom. Her body was submerged in a bathtub filled with bloody water. The chilling details of the call sent shockwaves through the precinct. Emergency responders were dispatched immediately, racing against time in the hope of saving Sheila's life. Following instructions from the 911 operator, Rod removed Sheila's body from the water and attempted resuscitation. He desperately performed CPR, but it quickly became evident that his efforts were in vain. Sheely's body was cold and unresponsive, her lifeless form an undeniable testament to the tragedy that had occurred. Overwhelmed with grief and despair, Rod covered her body with a blanket from the bedroom and waited for the authorities to arrive. Within minutes, a team of police officers arrived at the scene. The Kovlins' residence, located in one of Manhattan's most affluent and secure neighborhoods, stood as an incongruous backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. The officers entered the home cautiously, taking in the signs of an interrupted family life. Children's toys scattered across the living room floor, remnants of holiday preparations evident throughout the apartment. But their attention was soon drawn to the bathroom where Sheely's body lay. The scene in the bathroom was both heartbreaking and perplexing. The bathtub's water, still tinged with blood, had begun to cool. The floor was slick, evidence of the struggle to pull Sheely from the tub. Her head bore a visible wound, a small but unmistakable gash on the back of her skull that continued to bleed. Nearby, the bathroom's cabinet door hung askew, its hinge partially torn from the frame. The placement of the cabinet and the condition of the hinge suggested that Sheely might have slipped while attempting to steady herself, leading to a fatal fall. The police's initial assessment leaned toward the conclusion that Sheely's death was a tragic accident. The Upper West Side's reputation for safety and the absence of obvious signs of foul play reinforced this theory. Forensic experts arrived shortly after the officers, meticulously combing the scene for clues. Their investigation confirmed several key details. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle beyond the bathroom, and no indications of robbery. Investigators increasingly leaned towards the belief that Sheely's death was an accident. However, doubts and complexities soon began to surface. The detective handling the case decided to speak with family members, hoping to confirm the sequence of events leading to the tragedy. During the interviews, it was revealed that Sheely's body was first discovered by her daughter. The young woman, traumatized and shocked by what she had seen, managed to recount to the police officer the harrowing events of that night. It was uncovered that the previous night, Sheely's 2 children had been sleeping in her bed, which was a common occurrence in their household. Waking up in the middle of the night and noticing her mother's absence, the young woman instinctively went to search for her. She stumbled upon a horrifying scene in the bathroom, her mother's lifeless body submerged in the bathtub. Stricken with fear, the child hurriedly contacted her father. Rod Kovlin, who had recently separated from Sheely and moved into an apartment on the same floor of the building, received the call. Crossing the corridor, he quickly arrived at Sheely's apartment. Entering the bathroom, Rod pulled her body from the water and immediately called emergency services. The daughter's account of events closely matched Rod's description, reinforcing the police's initial theory that Sheely's death was a tragic accident. The authorities promptly informed Sheely's relatives about the incident, leaving the family devastated and in mourning. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day to ascertain the precise cause of death. However, to the investigators' surprise, the autopsy was abruptly canceled. When the medical examiner contacted the investigative team to begin the procedure, he learned to his astonishment that it would not take place. This unexpected turn of events puzzled the examiner, who wondered how such a crucial step could be bypassed. The investigation revealed that a rabbi from the synagogue Sheely regularly attended had intervened. In adherence to Orthodox Jewish tradition, which views autopsies as desecrations of the deceased's body, the rabbi had contacted an organization specializing in Jewish burials. This organization swiftly petitioned the police for access to the site of the tragedy to perform religious rites required by the family's faith. Permission was granted, and the rabbi, along with a team from the burial organization, arrived at the scene. They cleansed the bathroom, removing all traces of blood, and prepared Sheely's body for burial according to religious customs. This process effectively destroyed all potential evidence before it could reach the police's forensic department. The family, deeply grieving and trusting the rabbi's guidance, agreed to forego the autopsy. Appreciative of the assistance and reassured by the explanation of the accident, they saw no reason to object. Within 24 hours of her death, Sheely was buried in a somber ceremony attended by hundreds who came to pay their respects and offer condolences. However, the The rapid burial and the destruction of potential evidence left lingering doubts in the minds of Sheila's parents. The notion that their daughter's death could be anything other than an accident began to trouble them deeply. The improbability of such a fatal outcome from a mere fall in the bathtub haunted them, even though no concrete evidence supported their suspicions. The New York Police Department's ability to investigate further was severely hampered by the absence of forensic evidence. Unwilling to let the matter rest, Sheila's family decided to hire a private investigator to probe deeper into the circumstances of her death. The private investigator began his inquiry by speaking with Sheila's relatives. Their statements painted a picture of a marriage far from idyllic. Rod and Sheila's relationship had been deteriorating for some time. Although they had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008, the following year marked the beginning of significant marital strife. Rod, it was revealed, had been struggling with instability in his career. He frequently changed jobs, unable to secure long-term employment. Financial difficulties compounded the stress on their marriage. Adding to this burden was Rod's gambling addiction, which had spiraled out of control. He had begun investing large sums of money into gambling, further straining their finances and their relationship. Sheila's growing concerns about Rod's behavioral changes began as small frustrations but soon escalated into significant and troubling issues. Initially, Rod's neglect of family responsibilities was an occasional annoyance. However, it quickly spiraled into a larger problem as his obsessions with computer games and backgammon tournaments consumed more of his time and attention. What once seemed like harmless hobbies turned into costly addictions, with Rod dipping into the family's savings to fund his participation in gambling tournaments. Adding to her distress was the discovery of Rod's infidelity. During his numerous trips for backgammon tournaments, he had been unfaithful, a truth Sheila uncovered by accessing his emails. The betrayal was devastating and marked a turning point in their already fractured relationship. Determined to regain control of her life and protect her children, Sheila sought and obtained permission for a religious divorce, a significant and difficult step within their Orthodox Jewish community. Although the couple maintained the outward appearance of marriage for the sake of their children, their separation was undeniable. Rod had moved to another apartment within the same building while the official divorce process was underway. Their relationship remained strained and contentious, punctuated by frequent conflicts and heated disagreements. While they made efforts to present a united front for their children, the reality was far from harmonious. Rod's behavior became increasingly alarming. Sheila confided in friends about his aggressive and hot-tempered nature, recounting specific incidents that made her feel unsafe in her own home. She suspected that Rod was monitoring her movements and invading her privacy. Sheila believed he had been entering her apartment while she was out, checking her emails and possibly spying on her in other ways. Her suspicions deepened when she noticed unusual behavior from Rod, including the possibility that he had installed a surveillance camera in the building's corridor to track her comings and goings. These unsettling revelations added layers of complexity to their marital discord and raised serious questions about the circumstances surrounding Sheila's death. To uncover the truth, her family hired a private detective who began piecing together these accounts and formulating a theory that Rod might have been involved in Sheila's untimely demise. The detective's first priority was to determine whether a crime had occurred within Sheila's apartment. However, gaining access to the scene proved to be a challenge, as the apartment had been sealed by authorities. Undeterred, the detective obtained a court order to unlock the apartment and arrived at the site accompanied by New York police officers. At the apartment, the detective attempted to use the key provided in advance but found the lock unusually tight. The situation took a strange turn when Rod emerged from his apartment at the end of the corridor, claiming he had heard noises and came to investigate. His sudden appearance raised suspicions. When questioned by the detective and police, Rod took the key and effortlessly unlocked the door. This act left the detective wondering if Rod had been deliberately monitoring the situation or if his timing was a mere coincidence. Once inside the apartment, the detective began a meticulous search for evidence to substantiate his theory of foul play. One of the most puzzling discoveries was the absence of Sheila's phone. Relatives confirmed that Sheila had been home on December 31, but her phone was nowhere to be found. The detective located the phone's charger in the apartment, but not the device itself, a detail that deepened the mystery surrounding her death. The detective's attention then turned to the bathroom, the site of Sheil's death. He closely examined the hinge that investigators initially believed Sheil had torn off during a fall. However, the more he scrutinized the hinge, the more implausible the original theory seemed. The hinge was securely fastened to the cabinet, and dislodging it would have required immense force. Even considering Sheil's weight and the circumstances of a potential fall, the likelihood of her causing such damage appeared highly improbable. After lengthy discussions with law enforcement, the detective argued that the evidence pointed not to an accident, but to kill. The investigators, however, remained unconvinced, citing insufficient proof to substantiate a homicide theory. Faced with this impasse, a decision was made to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. This development led to serious deliberations within Sheil's family. More than 2 weeks had passed since her burial, and the prospect of exhuming her body presented a profound dilemma. In Orthodox Jewish tradition, such interventions are deeply frowned upon, often viewed as a desecration of the deceased. Religious leaders expressed strong opposition to the exhumation, adding to the family's anguish. Despite these religious and emotional hurdles, they deemed it crucial to uncover the truth about their daughter's death and agreed to the exhumation. However, this crucial step was not only fraught with moral and religious considerations, but also entangled in legal complexities. To proceed with the exhumation, the family required a special order from the prosecutor's office. Securing this document was no easy feat, despite their explicit consent. The process dragged on for nearly 3 months and was plagued by bureaucratic delays and legal obstacles. Finally, with all necessary paperwork in hand, the exhumation and subsequent autopsy were carried out, revealing shocking truths that forever changed the narrative of Sheil's death. The autopsy results were nothing short of startling. Medical examiners determined that Sheil had not died from an accidental fall, as initially reported. Instead, her death was caused by asphyxiation resulting, which also fractured several of her neck bones. This grim discovery confirmed the detectives' long-held suspicions and provided irrefutable evidence that Sheila had been murdered. With this revelation, the official cause of death was amended, and the case was reclassified as a homicide. The detectives' relentless efforts now bore fruit, as the findings prompted the New York Police Department to reopen the investigation with renewed urgency. Investigators immediately dove into the case, meticulously re-examining every detail. They analyzed phone records, financial transactions, and any other pieces of information that could provide insight into Sheil's life and interactions. This comprehensive approach extended beyond family members to include anyone connected to Rod and Sheila. The nanny, housemater, and even the lawyer managing their divorce were interviewed, each contributing valuable pieces to the puzzle. Among the revelations was a troubling account from the divorce lawyer, who described unusual behavior from Rod during their court proceedings. At their first divorce hearing in May 2009, Rod argued that he was unable to pay alimony due to unemployment. When the presiding judge made a lighthearted remark about Rod potentially giving up his expensive hobbies, Rod's reaction was explosive. His outburst in the courtroom offered a glimpse into his volatile nature, which left an indelible impression on those present. Rod's retaliatory actions against Sheila became increasingly malicious. He launched a campaign of false accusations, attempting to tarnish her reputation by claiming she led an indecent lifestyle, misused family funds, and even abused drugs. Rod went as far as contacting Sheila's employer, fabricating stories about her alleged violent behavior towards their son. Although an investigation was initiated in response to these allegations, it ultimately found no basis for Rod's claims, further highlighting his efforts to discredit and punish Sheila. The most disturbing aspect of Rod's actions came to light during an interview with the couple's son. The boy revealed that his father had coached him to recite damaging statements about his mother. This manipulation of his own child painted a harrowing picture of Rod's character. His actions had severe consequences. During a subsequent divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, Rod was prohibited from being alone with his children. This restriction remained in place even after Sheila's death, as custody of the children was transferred to Rod's parents. Rod's fury over losing custody and control of his children further fueled suspicions about his potential motives. Further details emerged from interviews with a former caregiver for the children, who shared intriguing observations about Sheil's final days. On December 30, Sheila underwent a costly keratin hair treatment, an indulgence worth several $100s. Such treatments require strict aftercare, including avoiding moisture and heat for several days. Investigators questioned why Sheila, known for her meticulousness, would disregard these guidelines by taking a bath the following day. This contradiction led detectives to speculate that Sheila had not entered the bathtub willingly on the day of her death. While compelling, this line of reasoning alone was insufficient to establish Rod's guilt. The investigation took another turn when detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the couple's building. The footage captured Rod exhibiting peculiar behavior on the night of Sheila's death. At approximately 4 a.m., Rod was seen leaving his apartment dressed as though he were heading outside. He returned a short time later. The building's night watchman, who was questioned by the police, noted the unusual timing of Rod's outing. Rod, known for rarely leaving his apartment at odd hours, had engaged the watchman in conversation, offering him chocolate bars upon his return. Detectives interpreted this interaction as a calculated attempt by Rod to establish an alibi. With these discoveries, Rod became the primary suspect in Sheila's murder. The detectives' challenge was to piece together the evidence and establish a concrete case against him. Central to their inquiry was the pressing question: what could have driven Rod to commit such a heinous act? During the investigation, an important fact came to light. Despite having gone through 2 contentious divorce hearings, Sheila and Rod were still legally married. This status had significant implications. Without a finalized divorce or a valid will naming alternative beneficiaries, all of Sheila's assets, valued at over $5 million, would automatically be inherited by Rod. This potential windfall added a financial dimension to the case that investigators could not ignore. Another critical discovery was that on December 31, 2009, the very day before her death, Sheila had scheduled an appointment with her lawyer to revise her will. Her intention was to exclude Rod entirely from her estate. This decision, had it been executed, would have deprived Rod of the considerable inheritance. Investigators concluded that Rod, already a suspect, would have been well aware of Sheila's plans if he had been monitoring her. The financial motive became undeniable, and the impending loss of $5 million provided a compelling reason for kill. To secure Sheila's assets while the investigation progressed, all her financial holdings were transferred to a secure account. Meanwhile, suspicions grew that Rod may have employed spyware or other surveillance methods to track Sheila's movements. Surveillance footage from the building showed Sheila arriving home at 8 p.m. the night before her death, talking on her mobile phone. However, the phone was missing after the crime. Investigators became certain the phone had been in the apartment at the time of her death and decided to revisit the crime scene for another search. What they found was both shocking and perplexing. During their renewed examination of the apartment, Sheila's mobile phone was discovered on her bedside table, connected to its charger. This was an extraordinary development, as during the initial searches, conducted both by the New York police and the private investigator, the phone had been conspicuously absent. Photos taken during those searches confirmed its absence. The only plausible explanation was that someone, likely Rod, had accessed the sealed apartment and returned the phone. Whether this act was a foolish blunder or deliberate taunt directed at the investigators remained unclear. Rod was promptly summoned for questioning. However, he had retained legal counsel who advised him to exercise his right to remain silent. This left investigators scrambling to find other evidence of his involvement. A breakthrough came when they examined Rod's phone records, which revealed frequent calls to a number registered in Jacksonville, North Carolina. The number belonged to Deborah Holmes, a married woman 14 years Rod's senior with 3 children. Rod and Deborah had reportedly met at a backgammon competition 5 months before Sheila's murder and had since carried on a passionate affair. They maintained their relationship through in-person meetings at tournaments and by playing online together. Believing Deborah might hold critical information, the investigators reached out to her for an interview. To their surprise, Deborah informed them that her lawyer had instructed her not to speak with them. The twist deepened when they discovered that her lawyer was the same attorney representing Rod Coughlin. This connection raised suspicions that Deborah might have been more deeply involved in Rod's affairs than initially assumed. Law enforcement officials turned their focus to electronic communications between Rod and Deborah, hoping to uncover incriminating messages. Sheely's recently recovered phone became a key piece of evidence. Unfortunately, investigators found that all messages and data on the device had been professionally deleted, leaving no trace behind. Even forensic experts were unable to recover the information. The meticulous nature of the deletions pointed directly to Rod's involvement and his efforts to stay one step ahead of the authorities. His actions, including the rapid cleaning of the crime scene, the erasure of messages, and his tight-lipped response to questioning, seemed designed to frustrate investigators at every turn. As months turned into years, the case grew colder. Rod continued to evade justice, bolstered by a lack of tangible evidence. The missing DNA, fingerprints, and fibers compounded the difficulties for law enforcement. Despite their suspicions, the police were unable to bring charges against Rod, and the case stalled. It appeared that Rod's planning had created a near-perfect crime. 5 years passed. The investigation into Sheely's death seemed destined to remain unresolved. However, in a surprising twist, Deborah Holmes contacted the police out of the blue. By this time, her relationship with Rod had ended, and she appeared willing to share new information. Investigators wasted no time inviting her to the station. Deborah Holmes immediately came in. It turned out that she and Rod had broken up a few months earlier, prompting her to contact the police. What Deborah shared with investigators over the next 3 days left them stunned and horrified. Her revelations painted a chilling picture of Rod Kovlin's twisted ambitions and schemes, which extended far beyond his deceased wife's millions. Deborah disclosed that Rod had become consumed with regaining control over his children and accessing Sheely's fortune. With no custody rights and no direct access to Sheely's estate due to his status as a suspect, Rod devised increasingly sinister plans to achieve his goals. One of Rod's most vile schemes involved his own daughter. Knowing that his parents held custody of the children, Rod intended to manipulate his 15-year-old daughter into staging an assault. The plan was to falsely accuse his own dad of the crime, leading to the grandfather's imprisonment and the subsequent loss of custody rights. In this scenario, Rod would gain control of his children and, by extension, access to Sheely's wealth. He even attempted to bribe his daughter into agreeing to this heinous plan, offering her money as an incentive. Meanwhile, Rod had been recklessly depleting the funds in an account that Sheila had specifically set aside for their children's education. This was the only account he could access, and he used it for personal expenses and gambling. Rod's parents, who were managing the children's care, became alarmed by his behavior. They confronted him about his squandering of the children's future savings, leading to a heated dispute. Rod's anger toward his parents escalated to the point where he seriously contemplated taking their lives. In 2012, Rod confided in Deborah about one of his horrifying plans. He proposed having his daughter poison her grandparents by putting rat poison in their tea. Rod believed that as a minor, his daughter would face minimal consequences if caught. Deborah managed to dissuade him from carrying out this malevolent idea, but Rod's depravity didn't stop there. He considered other horrific actions, such as setting fire to his parents' house and jamming the doors to ensure they couldn't escape. At one point, he even proposed arranging a sham marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, which would force her to relinquish part of her inheritance to him. Listening to Deborah's testimony, investigators were appalled by the depths of Rod's depravity. Deborah had spent years gathering evidence against him, carefully collecting recordings and data on hard drives. Realizing she was dealing with a dangerous psychopath, she waited until Rod lost interest in her before turning the evidence over to law enforcement. The recordings contained hundreds, if not thousands, of Rod's conversations with various individuals. Investigators now faced the arduous task of analyzing this trove of information to find concrete evidence against him. Their efforts paid off. In one recorded conversation with a backgammon acquaintance, Rod casually mentioned having keys to Sheely's apartment and the ability to enter it at any time. This revelation aligned with earlier suspicions that Rod had tampered with the crime scene, including returning Sheely's missing phone. Among the files, investigators found evidence that Rod had attempted to frame his daughter for Sheely's death. He had fabricated an email, supposedly written by his daughter, confessing to pushing her mother during an argument. The email claimed the altercation led to Shields' fatal fall in the bathroom. With this mountain of evidence, law enforcement finally had enough to charge Rod Coughlin with the murder of his wife. On November 1, 2015, Rod was arrested. Shields' family, who had endured years of uncertainty and grief, awaited his trial with cautious optimism. However, victory was not assured. Much of the evidence was circumstantial, and a skilled defense attorney could potentially cast doubt on Rod's guilt. Detectives continued to work tirelessly, searching for definitive proof to secure a conviction. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While in prison, Rod confided in a fellow inmate, describing the details of his wife's murder. He even demonstrated the gesture he used to strangle her, providing a chilling reenactment. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage of the prison, they found that Rod's actions perfectly matched the findings of Shields' autopsy. This was the irrefutable evidence they needed, amounting to an almost direct confession. The trial lasted an arduous 7 weeks, during which the jury was presented with the full extent of Rod's heinous actions. They heard about his calculated plans to murder his wife, harm his parents, and manipulate his own children. Each revelation painted a portrait of a man driven by greed and devoid of empathy. The jury was appalled by his cold-blooded and deceitful nature. It took them 2 days to reach a final verdict. In March 2019, the court found Rod Coughlin guilty of the demise of Sheil Coughlin, his wife, and the mother of his children. Despite the lack of direct evidence, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 25 years.